It was hoped that lunar rocks would help solve that mystery. The Apollo 11 mission in 1969 marked the beginning of direct human exploration on the Moon. During 6 missions, 382 kilograms of lunar rock were collected. Transporting all that from far-flung locations on the Moon's surface required a lot of power. Apollo 15 finally developed the answer: the Lunar Roving Vehicle. Moving about freely on the Moon's surface, this lunar rover could take astronauts farther afield than they could go on foot. However, developing the rover was very much a matter of trial and error. The lunar soil would be very different from Earth's. Engineers had to develop a vehicle that could operate on all kinds of terrain. Weighing just 200 kilograms, but capable of carrying a 500-kilogram load. A supercar that would be used to locate and transport rocks on the surface of the Moon.
It was a great vehicle. They did a wonderful job in building it, you know, especially for those days. It's hard to believe now. We're talking how long ago? 40 years, 30 years? What are we talking, you know?
The last flight in the Apollo program was Apollo 17. On this mission, NASA finally included a scientist astronaut. This was a final chance to investigate on the Moon's surface, a gamble that they could discover lunar materials of types never found before.
Hey, there is orange soil. Orange!
They succeeded far beyond their expectations, finding traces of the Moon's dramatically violent past. This is the story of how the Apollo program developed a vehicle that could drive around on the Moon, collecting rocks and soil that revealed billions of years of history. From time immemorial, people have cast longing glances at the Moon and wished for a chance to travel there. The first person to make that dream come true was the brilliant rocket scientist Wernher von Braun. He led the Apollo program, which actually landed men on the Moon. A decade before the start of the Apollo program, von Braun's conceptualizations of space development were carried in a magazine. At a time when it wasn't even known if humans could traverse the distance to the Moon and back, his blueprints for space development were bold and detailed. Each and every conceptual drawing overflowed with von Braun's enthusiasm for space travel. Exploration on the moon's surface was also included. A major role was to be played by lunar rovers. They were to function somewhat like the covered wagons that blazed trails through the American West. Clearly, even before space travel began in earnest, a lunar vehicle was conceived of as essential to exploration on the moon's surface. The latter half of the 1950s saw the start of a space race between the United States and the Soviet Union. These two superpowers staked their prestige on efforts to launch artificial satellites. In 1961, the Apollo program was launched, with von Braun playing a central role. The next year, development of a lunar vehicle began. Its construction proceeded in tandem with development of the Apollo rocket engines themselves. The best regarded prospect from that phase of development has been preserved. The MOLAB, or Mobile Laboratory, built in 1964. The tires were huge. The vehicle was 9 meters long and weighed 3 tons. The inside was spacious. The design permitted 2 astronauts to live and work there for 2 weeks. The steering wheel and foot pedals were the same size as in an ordinary passenger vehicle. Development was spearheaded by 2 representatives of America's largest auto manufacturer, Chief Engineer Ferenc Pavliks and team leader Samuel Romano. Development went smoothly, but this rover never made it to the moon's surface. The problem was that massive body. NASA realized that they would need another rocket just for the rover, in addition to the one carrying the astronauts. In 1966, the year before the scheduled first trip to the moon, development on the lunar rover was suspended. It was a setback, but the developers waited for another chance.
Our job is laid out for us. Our task is laid out for us, yeah. But we didn't have any problems. We didn't think that we couldn't do it. It was our job to get it done, and we got it done.
In March 1969, faced with the upcoming launch of Apollo 11, the 2 men went to inspect the completed lunar module, or landing craft. They knew that their only hope of getting a rover onto the moon would be aboard the lunar module. But the lunar module had no space to spare, except for one unused compartment they spotted. It was a recess just 1.5 meters square and 0.9 meters deep.
Well, when we first saw this is impossible. We couldn't fit this larger vehicle in that space.
But Pavliks, the engineer, did not give up. He tried to see how compact he could make the rover. To carry 2 astronauts, it had to be at least 3 meters long. To get around on the moon's rock-strewn surface, it had to have large tires. But any way they calculated it, it was too big to fit on the lunar landing module. Was there no way to get it onto the lunar module? For 3 months, they experimented with mock-ups. Then, one day,
it's usually these ideas come very suddenly, you know. Eureka.
what was this sudden inspiration? Pavliks demonstrates with a 1/6 model.
Then the seats must be folded down. Then the front chassis, which is hinged, is folded over 180 degrees. Then the same way the rear chassis is folded up. Then the wheels are folded in to the 45-degree angle. And then the complete assembly fits into that triangular shaped envelope, which is between two legs of the lunar landing module.
It was ingenious. A foldable vehicle was a huge step toward including a rover in the moon landing mission. Two weeks before the scheduled launch of Apollo 11, the two men took their model to NASA for a demonstration.
When we went to Huntsville, and the engineering people were very excited that, hey, maybe this could work, okay? So one of the engineers said, why don't we show it to Dr. von Braun, who was the director of the Huntsville NASA organization.
Von Braun had the final say on lunar rover development. They had to arouse his interest and enthusiasm. Pavliks had an idea how to do that.
So he led the way to von Braun's office, opened the door, and I guided the vehicle into his office with radio control, that he couldn't see anybody but this little vehicle coming into his office. And he was on the telephone, saw this little thing coming in, and put the telephone down and said, what is this? And then we walked into the office, explained to him what the concept is, demonstrated all the folding up.
Von Braun listened intently. Then, suddenly,
he slammed his hand on a table and he said, we must do this. We must run a vehicle on the moon. And we convinced NASA to go ahead and do it, and we got a contract to do it.
the lunar rover concept championed by the two men had previously been scuttled. Now they'd been given a second chance. Two weeks later, Apollo 11 was launched. The entire world awaited the moon landing with bated breath. The rehearsals for the Apollo program of putting men on the moon and bringing them back were over. This was the real thing. Three months later, the lunar rover project began in earnest. It had a new and powerful supporter, Saverio Maurea. Maurea was a capable manager who had overseen the successful development of the Apollo program's giant rocket engines.
all they do to send out the next model car, it takes them like 4 years before they're happy with the design and they can finally put one out on the street that's different. We had to produce flight hardware for astronauts in a totally unknown environment in 17.5 months.
Starting with Apollo 11, NASA was planning on about one moon landing every 6 months. Apollo 15 was scheduled to undertake full-scale research on the moon's surface in 1971, just 2 years away. The lunar rover would have to be operational for that mission. The contract required development and production within a mere 18 months. This vehicle would be the first ever to run on a surface other than planet Earth's. It was a tough schedule, but they started development by trial and error. The first requirement was the capability to roam freely over the moon's rough terrain. The lunar rover would be useless unless it could easily surmount obstacles as high as 30 centimeters. The vehicle utilized technologies that were still unavailable to vehicles on Earth. It was an electric car, whose 4 wheels were powered by dedicated motors drawing on 2 silver zinc batteries. The 4 motors put out a combined total of 1 horsepower. That was enough for the moon, whose gravity is only 1/6 that of Earth's. Operation was simplified. The manual controller had steering, acceleration, and braking functions all there at the driver's fingertips. Later, to accommodate the bulkiness of the astronaut spacesuits, the controller was reconfigured to a T-shape, so the driver's hand could rest on it comfortably. The design goal was operational ease. Maneuvering the rover was simple. Tilt the controller forward to start moving. Tilt right, it turns right. Tilt left, it turns left. Pull back to engage the brake. Push the button and pull back to put it in reverse. In test runs, actual astronauts checked out every feature very carefully. It functioned superbly. Everyone agreed development had gone well. Morea, however, spotted a surprising flaw.
Not so much the vehicle itself, but how the man would interact with a vehicle like ours in a 1/6G environment.
But what would it be like on the surface of the moon? No one could predict that. So they tested the rover's seats inside a large airplane, which was flown so as to simulate 1/6 of the Earth's gravity. This is the footage of that experiment. The astronaut flops about and can't get seated. There was no point in having a rover one could not ride. But this problem was solved with a little ingenuity. A 15-centimeter bolt protruding from the floor of the car body. The astronaut could then hook his foot briefly under the bolt, levering himself onto and into the seat. Problem solved.
That was the big one. Simple solution, but big issue. This was not simplistic. This was a spacecraft on wheels.
April 1970. By now, they had reached Apollo 13, but the lunar rover had run into a seemingly impassable developmental wall. The problem? The material and shape of those huge tires. In the vacuum of space, pneumatic rubber tires would blow out. They were simply not practical. What's more, on the moon, the terrain, scarred from the impact of countless small meteorites, is uneven, full of potholes. But in some places, the soil is finely granulated, like powder. The tires would have to do well on that sort of terrain as well. They needed something strong, resistant to temperature fluctuations. They thought of a material quite unsuitable for terrestrial tires: metal.
Should be flexible because it was carrying people, so the ride characteristic had to be such that it cannot be a rigid wheel. So we came up with this idea of making a flexible wheel, making it out of spring material.
So they created 10 types of metal wheels or tires and tested each and every type. It had to be lightweight and suited to any terrain. It also had to give a comfortable ride. This is the one they finally chose. Metal filaments were woven together at 4mm intervals. This was a wire mesh tire.
This wheel is a very good simulation of an actual tire. It yields as you press on it, and it returns, and it has enough strength to carry the weight of the vehicle. So it seemed like it, and it can't blow out.
Romano's team had overcome their greatest obstacle. Where does a wire mesh tire get its strength and versatility? Kazuya Yoshida, who helped develop the Japanese asteroid explorer Hayabusa, ran some tests. He fabricated two 15-centimeter diameter wire mesh tires and attached them to a small testing unit. A rock was inserted in the test bed to create a 3-centimeter high obstacle. How will the tires perform? The test unit easily negotiates the obstacle. When tire meets rock, the tire changes shape to accommodate the rock. That suppleness in the wire mesh tire, allowing it to traverse both rocky ground and softer soil, is exactly what is needed on variable terrain like the moon's. The rover was now outfitted with wire mesh tires. The next step was to simulate lunar conditions for full-scale testing. One trick was to have the rover lifted slightly by a crane as it ran, so it would be 1/6 of its real weight, as it would be on the moon. Only after it passed numerous performance tests was the lunar rover deemed ready. Just 4 months before the scheduled flight of Apollo 15, the lunar rover was packed into the side of the landing module. And NASA was setting a new plan in motion. The moon's surface has both dark-colored and light-colored areas. Up to Apollo 14, the moon landings had all been on the dark areas. They are called seas, and they are flat. That made them relatively safe for landing. But the only kind of rock they could find in such places was basalt. There's plenty of that on Earth. So Apollo 15 would approach one of the light areas instead. The plan was to set the lunar module down near the edge of a dark sea, and then have astronauts set out in the rover for brighter, higher ground. NASA had not yet obtained any rocks from the moon's highlands. July 26, 1971. With the lunar rover on board for the very first time, Apollo 15 took off for the moon. Taking the rover made this an historic flight, one that marked the beginning of true lunar exploration. Four days later, the Falcon lunar landing module set down safely on one of the moon's seas, near a mountain range. They were about to realize the fruits of a year and a half of development. An astronaut held the rope that would release the lunar rover from its cargo bay. Back at Mission Control, the two men who had worked so hard to develop the rover held their breath. The rope is yanked hard, and the rover begins to emerge. All it took was one quick pull for the rover to start to deploy. In just 5 minutes, there was the lunar rover, ready to roll. But then came something unforeseen.
Got a deep hit. We're moving. Extraordinary. Negative. But I don't have any front steering, Joe.
There was no front steering at all.
Oops, yeah, it was oops. As a matter of fact, within minutes, I got a call from the vice president from Detroit, General Motors, that what's going on? Can you fix the problem? So it was a high, visibility type of operation.
No front steering could have been a serious setback. But the rover had a built-in feature that saved the day. The front and rear wheels actually operated in tandem in a 4-wheel steering system. To turn right, for example, the front wheels would point right and the rear wheels would point left. all four contributing to the turn. On Apollo 15, the front wheels did not steer when first powered up, but the independently powered back wheels still operated sufficiently for the vehicle to be maneuvered. "40 minutes later, the rover was declared ready to explore the moon.
Ben, this is really a rock and rollin' ride, isn't it? Never been on a ride like this before. Boy, oh boy. I'm glad they got this great suspension system on this thing. Boy.
Average speed, 12 kilometers per hour. The two astronauts riding the rover were just ecstatic. Then, suddenly, they realized they could no longer see the lunar module. Since the moon is only 1/4 the size of Earth, traveling 3 kilometers as they had put them beyond the horizon. But that was no cause for alarm. They had built-in technology that gave them distance and angle to the lunar module. The first ever lunar car navigation system. With no fear of getting lost, they were emboldened to go even beyond the sight lines to the lunar module. On the second day of exploration, they made a great discovery. It was while the rover was en route to higher ground. The two explorers were at the edge of a vast crater.
Okay, Jimmy, let's go to work. Roger. Look at that. Almost see twinning in there. Guess what we just found? I think we found what we came for. Crystal and rock, huh? Yes, sir. You better believe it.
It was a white rock, which they called the Genesis Rock. The highlands were composed of rock that formed shortly after the moon itself was born. Hitherto, the lunar seas had yielded only black basalt. What Apollo 15 retrieved from the highlands was a white rock called anorthosite. This discovery made it possible to construct a scenario explaining how the moon achieved its current shape and characteristics. 4.6 billion years ago, the solar system had only just taken shape. Right after the Earth itself was born, a body the size of Mars collided with it. This giant impact, as it's called, blew a vast cloud of debris out into space. The fragments were gravitationally attracted to each other and fused in a repeated process. The result was the moon. As it took final shape, the moon was covered in magma, molten rock heated by the energy from all those collisions. In time, as the moon cooled, white anorthosite began to crystallize in the interior. With a relatively low specific gravity, the anorthosite gradually moved to the surface, where it formed the moon's crust. So at one point, it is thought the moon was entirely white. Then, however, the solar system was struck by a vast swarm of meteoroids. Impacts on the moon created giant craters. They punctured the crust, through which magma pushed up from the moon's core onto the surface. The magma, now lava, cooled in the form of black basalt. This is how the moon's seas were formed. This account of the formation of the moon is based on discoveries made possible by the lunar rover. In April 1972, Apollo 16 was launched. On this mission, too, the rover played a major role. It scampered easily over the moon's rough terrain. And it covered a total of 27 kilometers, 10 times farther than an astronaut could have walked in the same time period. The lunar rover had proved to be indispensable to the Apollo program's moon-based exploration. Suddenly, it was the last Apollo mission. NASA hoped for a spectacular new discovery. The objective was a gorge, cut into steep mountains. This terrain was far more complicated than any attempted before. There was a good chance some strange new rocks would be discovered. And it was their last chance. So on Apollo 17, NASA sent in a ringer. For the first time, a scientist was aboard. A geologist named Harrison Schmitt. Nowadays, more astronauts than ever before have professional backgrounds in science and engineering. Their expertise is valued for conducting experiments in space. But on the Apollo program, given the extraordinarily complex operational requirements, all the astronauts except for Schmitt were military pilots. Schmitt had been fascinated by space since childhood, but he became a geologist. His chance to venture into space came when he was 29 years old.
It was on very short notice. The NASA and the National Academy of Sciences asked for volunteers for scientists to become astronauts in November of 1964. And I thought for about 10 seconds and decided that I would regret not volunteering, and so I volunteered.
Schmitt had never piloted anything more complex than an automobile, but NASA drummed new operational skills into him. Apollo 17 was the last chance to discover new moon rocks. Capitalizing on that chance was up to Schmitt. December 7, 1972. With one lunar rover and one scientist on board, this was Apollo's last chance. Schmitt was given the responsibility of piloting the lunar landing module. 4 days later, they had reached lunar orbit. The lunar module separated from the command module and began its descent to the surface. Carefully, they descended to a narrow gap between steep mountain ridges. In the end, Schmidt and his crewmates made a successful landing.
Stand by for touchdown. Stand by.
They had landed perfectly in the middle of the valley.
As I step off at the
Surrounded by this magnificent scenery, the normally calm Schmidt could not conceal his excitement.
to all those who made it possible.
Really would be great to go to this valley, this deep mountain valley. It's deeper than the Grand Canyon of the Colorado. I mean, it was a very deep valley. It was splitting the ring of mountains around this large basin called Serenitatis. And it had these young volcanics. It had a lot of a very attractive thing.
Schmidt and another astronaut boarded the rover right away and set off to investigate. They traveled west to a point 3.5 kilometers from the lunar module. Right in front of them was a crater more than 100 meters in diameter. Schmidt's instincts as a geologist told him to focus his attention on this crater.
And I think everybody in Mission Control was excited about it too, because it was so unexpected.
The geologists in Mission Control could not conceal their enthusiasm either.
Light gray material.
Until then, there had been no indication that there had ever been volcanic activity on the moon.
We're gonna have to, that's a key to get it down some cone.
A close look at the sand reveals tiny globs of glass, 0.1 millimeters across. They called it orange glass.
It was a volcanic deposit, what we call a pyroclastic deposit. Certainly people in Japan are very familiar with volcanoes that erupt and give and throw glass and debris around. Well, this had happened on the moon.
The orange glass was created 3.6 billion years ago. At the bottom of a crater made by a meteorite impact, magma spewed forth from the moon's core. A fire fountain sprayed droplets of magma from 400 kilometers below the crust out into the cold of space, where they instantly cooled into globules of glass. Schmidt and his colleagues had discovered irrefutable evidence of volcanic activity on the moon. "36 years later, the Japanese unmanned lunar explorer Kaguya photographed the moon's surface with a special camera. It identified more than 40 locations on the moon where there was sand with the same composition as the orange glass. This confirmed that the moon, like Earth, had seen a great deal of volcanic activity.
We were told later on that without the rover, NASA or the government would have cancelled the last 3 or at least 2 Apollo flights. So it was, in a sense, the rovers were saved the last 3 of the Apollo flights, because it was a new element in the exploration.
The riddle of the moon's origin was solved by the Genesis rock and orange glass, and it was the lunar rover that led to these discoveries. It's been 40 years since the end of the Apollo program. But research is still being done on the rocks brought back from the moon. New facts are even now coming to light. Alberto Saal is an associate professor of geological sciences at Brown University in the U.S. He's using Earth's latest technology to study the moon's orange glass. When the magma spewed out of those lunar craters, it instantly formed glass globules that incorporated substances from the moon's core. That makes them time capsules of the very origin of the moon. Analysis yielded unanticipated results. Trapped in the orange glass were some of the same gases that exist on Earth, such as fluorine and chlorine. This supported the theory that the moon came from the Earth. Another completely unanticipated substance was found: water. This was the first ever proof that there was water on the moon. When Earth suffered the giant impact that gave birth to the moon, the fragments of Earth dislodged into space were heated to 4,000 degrees Celsius. It had been thought that all the water would have evaporated. But where had the moon's water come from? Currently, the world's only isotope microscope is being used to analyze the moon rocks to solve that very riddle. Hisayoshi Yurimoto has been conducting research of this sort, including analysis of the Apollo mission's moon rocks. That includes measurements of deuterium, a hydrogen isotope. Amounts differ depending on the type of space object in which they are found. The water in the moon rocks contains from 0.02 to 0.03% deuterium. Comparable amounts of deuterium are found in another well-known type of space object: comets. In the solar system of 4 billion years ago, there were many more comets than there are now passing through. Yurimoto believes that the moon was showered with a huge quantity of comet ice in that era, when the comets passed too close to the sun. At that time, it recouped some of the water lost after the event of the giant impact. Since the Apollo missions, no one has walked on the moon. But plans are underway now for new moonwalks. In 2009, the U.S. launched the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, or LRO. It is parked in lunar orbit 21 kilometers above the moon, from which it photographs the surface. This is an effort to compile detailed information for the next people who attempt to conduct investigations on the moon's surface. This is one of the images captured by the LRO. It's the Apollo 17 lunar landing site. Those spidery lines mark where the lunar rover scudded across the moon's surface. Their tracks remain even now. At the end of one of those tracks, a lunar roving vehicle, no longer roving. The rover was a major player in moon explorations of an earlier era. Now it sits there patiently, waiting to greet new explorers from Earth.
To the broiling heat of Earth's closest neighbor, radical weather is the norm in the solar system. We do have our own extremes here on Earth, but they pale in comparison to the fastest, dustiest, wettest, and most brutal alien storms. On Earth, the sun drives our weather, and sometimes drives it wild. When hot and cold collide in the atmosphere, watch out. This is true locally and globally. But storms on other planets are bigger, badder, and stranger than their counterparts on Earth. Why is that? Because of the sun? If not, what else fuels their fury? The basic laws of nature, the rules of the game, are pretty much the same wherever you go in the solar system. But every planet has its own way of playing the game. Right now on Mars, the entire planet is being covered in dust. This global dust storm blocks 99% of the sun's rays from reaching the planet's surface. It's actually a system of smaller but still massive storms churning dust high into the atmosphere. Once it starts, it takes months for Martian skies to clear.
Mars is just the most dramatic weather in the solar system in some senses. It's very rare in the solar system you get a weather event that can take out the whole planet.
So if the basic rules of hot and cold are the same on Mars, why is the weather so different from Earth? For one thing, Mars is half the size of Earth. It's also 50% further from the sun, so it's much colder. The average temperature on Mars is minus 80 degrees. That's almost 130 degrees colder than Earth. And the atmosphere is extremely thin and composed mostly of carbon dioxide. But perhaps the most important difference is this: Mars is a global desert.
What would Earth be like without water? Well, it'd probably have a lot of dust.
There's no liquid water at the surface of Mars, and there's very little water in the atmosphere, and so there's nothing to sort of keep the dust down.
On Earth, dust storms are localized and short-lived.
The reason for that difference in scale is that the storms are generating their own weather on Mars, whereas on the Earth, they're slave to the weather that's going on around them.
In other words, on Earth, the global weather system creates dust storms. On Mars, the storms create a global weather system. Astronomers have always been able to see big Martian dust storms easily with Earth-based telescopes. But what they couldn't see was what caused them. That would require a trip to Mars itself. In 2003, NASA landed 2 rovers called Spirit and Opportunity on the Martian surface. Their mission? To learn more about the geology of the red planet. NASA engineers always assumed that as these 2 vehicles roamed the Martian surface, dust would build up on their solar panels.
If you have a lot of dust that's falling down out of the atmosphere and coating the panels, pretty soon you're not getting much sun to the silicon. And in fact, we thought that was what was going to kill the rover Spirit and Opportunity.
Only it never happened. The rovers didn't die as expected. As dust built up on the panels, somehow something would clean them off. But how could this be? NASA engineers were baffled until the rovers themselves saw the culprit. Martian dust devils.
It turns out that dust devils were sort of our white knight. They came along and cleaned off the solar panels just at the time we were expecting to start having some problems.
There are beautiful photos that actually show dust devils moving across the Martian atmosphere and ghostly soldiers moving out there in the distance.
A dust devil is really an extreme form of rising hot air or convection.
And that hot air wants to go up, and it comes up just like, water going down a drain. Well, this is air that just spirals up into the colder parts of the atmosphere.
Whenever warmer air, which is less dense, rises up through cooler air, which is more dense, it rotates as it swirls upwards. Convection can be very powerful, strong enough to lift things up. On Earth, it lifts moisture, and that's how thunderstorms form. But on Mars, there is no moisture, so it lifts dry, dark dust and creates giant dust storms instead. Once airborne, Martian dust clouds absorb sunlight and heat the atmosphere. This supercharges the convection, lifting still more dust.
That produces more winds, which bring up more dust, and these things can spread up to thousands of miles across, or even, in some cases, they can envelop the entire planet.
And because the Martian atmosphere is so thin, it doesn't take much to get this cycle going.
You get a lot more difference between the surface temperature and the air temperature, and so the convection on Mars is very much more vigorous.
As a rule, Earth doesn't get the temperature extremes that Mars does. But sometimes, here and there in the deserts of Earth, convection can be very Martian-like. And we get dust devils, too. But at Arizona State University, Lynn Necrace makes dust devils to order in a lab to study them up close. He uses a vortex generator and substitutes lighter, dry ice for dust. What he creates is not an exact replica of how real dust devils form, but good enough to see how they pick up dust and debris.
Natural dust devils usually form from the bottom up, as opposed to tornadoes, which form from top down. So what happens when we turn this on, we have the airflow starting, and as the airflow starts to rotate from the fans down to the floor, we actually end up having the vortex form.
In other words, the vortex generator, basically a huge vacuum cleaner, imitates the swirling action of convection.
You can see here there's a wider base where larger particles of the dry ice are being swept up and gets wrapped up and tightens as it expands upward. The center of the core is where the majority of the lifting would occur.
Martian dust devils have been helpful, keeping the rovers clean. But could they actually be making a mess of the rest of the planet? Some scientists think there are so many at any one time, and they lift so much dust into the atmosphere, that together they trigger these much larger dust storms.
It starts wind patterns, and the air's warmer over here, and it's colder over here, and the air starts moving around. Pretty soon you're spreading dust over the whole planet.
And we found measurements that indicate there's up to maybe 200 dust devils per square mile per day during some parts of the summer.
And they can range from a couple of 100 feet tall to devils that stretch 6 or 7 miles high.
You can get just towering monsters of dust devils that we would never see on the Earth. The kind of maximum-sized dust devils you see on Mars are more like tornadoes on the Earth, where they're going up almost 10 kilometers. So these things are just real monster systems.
Back at Arizona State University, scientists blow crushed walnut shells as silicate particles in the Planetary Geology Wind Tunnel to replicate dust and wind conditions on Mars.
If we can understand and sort of replicate what's going on, then we can, in a sense, understand how the Martian surface has been changing and continues to change as time goes on.
Oddly enough, their studies reveal that it's easier for winds to loft larger sand particles into the air than smaller dust particles.
This is because there's cohesional forces and static forces between the very small, fine dust grains. We imaged the rover deck and actually found that sand seemed to have bounced onto the solar panels, and we can see the skip marks across the surface. And this is interesting because we don't usually see sand typically reach that high.
Dust devils on Earth never have the punch to produce that kind of chaos here. Lucky for us. But what would happen to Earth if a giant Martian-style dust storm did overtake us?
If you had dust storms of Martian size on the Earth, you would find your city being enveloped in an orange-tan haze.
Air quality plunges as the storm churns. Dust blots out the sun, shutting down photosynthesis. No plants, no food. Temperatures would plummet. 65 million years ago, an asteroid may have struck the Earth, creating these same conditions, wiping out the dinosaurs.
It's not going to happen on the Earth, though, because there's going to be rainfall and moisture condensing on the dust grains and so forth and dropping them out of the atmosphere. So it's very hard for something like that to spread in the climate conditions that we have on Earth.
Forecasting Martian weather may someday be just as important as forecasting the weather on Earth. If we ever want to send a manned mission there,
the word environment no longer really applies just to the meadow next door and the little stream down at the end of town. It's the whole inner solar system. I mean, that's really our environment now.
The sun's energy bathes all the planets. On Earth, it creates hurricanes. On Mars, planet-wide dust storms. But with almost no solar energy, distant Neptune produces violent and powerful winds. Where do they come from? And just how bad are they? If Neptune's winds were to travel to Earth, these alien storms would literally blow us away. The orbit of Neptune lies 3 billion miles from the Sun, at the outer edge of the solar system. There's a lot we don't know about this big blue planet. Neptune's jet stream winds blast as fast as 1,500 miles an hour in its upper atmosphere. But how? The sun controls the weather on Earth and Mars, but it barely reaches out here. No sunlight means freezing temperatures, an average of minus 392 degrees Fahrenheit. So if there's no sun and no heat, where do these incredible winds come from?
One of the interesting puzzles is that as you go further out in the solar system, you get further from the sun, the winds don't go down. You still get very strong winds.
The energy for Neptune's winds must come from somewhere, and scientists are working to figure it out.
Neptune's energy is certainly not going to be powered by solar radiation. In fact, the energy we detect coming out from the planet in the infrared as heat is 2.5 times the energy coming in from the sun.
So the planet is creating its own heat, not from its core, which is made of rock and ice, but wrapped around this icy center is a mantle of ammonia, methane, and water, all being squeezed by enormous pressure and generating tons of heat. So while Neptune is frigid on the outside, on the inside it's giving off a lot of heat. This heat may help generate Neptune's winds, but they're still too strong to come from the mantle alone. something else is pushing them faster and faster. Earth has a hot core too, and it's a lot closer to the sun. So why don't we have winds like Neptune? For one thing, our oceans store and release energy, and that helps generate our weather.
It adds energy in places, takes it out in others, in a very complicated system.
This complicated system produces a lot of wind. And just where are Earth's fastest winds found? Surprisingly, not over the ocean. They blow instead over the top of a fairly modestly sized mountain. New Hampshire's Mount Washington.
The highest winds ever observed by human beings were right here on Mount Washington at 231 miles an hour on April 12th in 1934.
Mount Washington Observatory, a private non-profit scientific institution, is responsible for tracking the weather and climate atop the 6,288-foot tall mountain. This remote weather station, accessible only by snow tractor in the winter, has kept daily records for the last 76 years.
It's definitely one of the most extreme locations on the planet. We regularly see in the wintertime winds exceeding 100 miles per hour every few days.
Nowhere near as ferocious as Neptune, yet still pretty strong. But why does this mountain, 1/5 the size of Everest, produce such fierce gusts?
We're at a place where we have winds converging from various directions, coming from the Ohio River Valley, coming down from the St. Lawrence River Valley, coming up the eastern seaboard, all converging here in this area on top of Mount Washington.
The elevation change from the valley floor to the summit of Mount Washington is very significant for any mountain range. It's over 4,000 feet, so air is forced to go over the mountaintop and forced to squeeze in there, and is accelerated as it's squeezed over the mountaintop.
And they measure it every hour, on the hour, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
It's blowing over 100 out here right now. Ice is forming on the instruments more quickly. It's time to go up and de-ice the instruments, even though it's blowing over 100. We got to do it every hour now.
Ironically, Earth's uneven surface, which channels winds into powerful gusts on Mount Washington, ultimately knocks them down over time. And this is the big difference between weather on Earth and weather on Neptune. Earth has mountains that slow winds down. Neptune is as smooth as a cue ball.
It's not so much a question of you're driving them stronger, because you're not. It's just that there's nothing to slow them down.
Simply put, once Neptune's winds get blowing, there's nothing to get in their way. So what would an average Neptune wind speed of 850 miles an hour do to us here on Earth?
We have parking level winds in the Earth sometimes above 100 miles an hour. We consider that pretty dangerous. So if we sat with 900 mile an hour winds from Neptune on the Earth, we would probably start wiping out everything on the surface and scraping everything off.
Giant Neptune takes wind and transforms it into something extreme and almost unrecognizable. But orbiting just beyond the rings of Saturn is a small moon that does the same thing to rain. This is Titan, where an everyday rain shower would turn Earth into an explosive fireball. It's a cloudy day, and a gentle rainstorm starts. Here on Earth, you'd grab your umbrella and consider it a minor inconvenience. But this isn't Earth, and it's no ordinary rain. You're on Titan, a small moon of Saturn. And in this chemical downpour, you'd need more than an umbrella to protect you. The rules of Earth weather definitely don't apply here. But Earth and Titan are alike in a lot of ways. On Earth, we have a solid surface, a protective atmosphere, and plenty of water. All these things make life on our planet possible. There's really nowhere else quite like Earth anywhere in the solar system. But Titan comes close. Like Earth, it has a solid surface. And that's not all.
Titan has an atmosphere that's, in general, very similar to Earth's. In some ways, it's mainly nitrogen like Earth's atmosphere. It's rich with organic material, also like Earth's atmosphere.
But similar isn't the same. Here on Earth, our atmosphere has a huge supply of water in it all the time, constantly evaporating and raining back down, like here on the Hawaiian island of Kauai.
Today we're on the slopes of Mount Waialeale, which is the cloud-shrouded mountain behind us. It rains over 40 feet a year here.
Earth's water cycle starts when warm, moist ocean air rises, forming clouds that eventually condense into rain. The rain falls back onto the land, where it eventually drains back into the ocean, starting the cycle again.
When water evaporates, it absorbs solar radiation. When water condenses, it releases all that energy into the atmosphere. And this transfer of heat helps to moderate conditions on Earth.
Earth's water stores as much as 80% of the sun's heat, helping keep our temperatures steady from the equator to the poles. Scientists theorize that Titan might have water or some other liquid that might produce a similar effect. And in 2004, when NASA's Cassini probe visited Saturn, it found some pretty good evidence to support that idea.
If you went to Titan and you were looking at the landscape, you would see something that in some ways would look almost familiar to you. You might see big mountains and valleys that were carved out by running liquids.
In fact, as Cassini flew past hazy Titan, its radar read the surface below. Scientists saw channels cutting across the surface, much like rivers on Earth do, some as long as 900 miles. The first strong evidence of liquid on Titan.
There are large bodies of liquid on the surface of Titan. Nowhere else in the solar system except for the Earth are there any large bodies of liquid.
Could water, the liquid that carves Earth's mountains and valleys, also be carving these features on Titan's surface? Or could it be something else? The problem is that Titan is too far away from the sun. If it was water, it would be frozen solid.
It's about minus 300 Fahrenheit on Titan, so things behave very differently on Titan than on Earth. Because it's so cold, methane, which is a gas on Earth, is a liquid on Titan.
One mystery solved. But just because methane is a liquid on Titan's surface doesn't mean it's part of a weather cycle like water on Earth. So how do we know that this methane also falls from Titan's sky? That answer is shrouded in mystery, literally.
Titan is completely covered in a thick haze of smog particles, like a very, very bad day in Los Angeles.
Despite the haze, the Cassini probe once again revealed the answer.
We can see the upper clouds, and we can see evidence for rainfall because the clouds drop very precipitously. We hypothesize that we're seeing the effects of rainfall.
Methane rainfall.
We think that Titan has methane monsoons, so we think that sometimes Titan has a lot of rain that is able to carve rivers and leave large fluvial deposits on the surface.
Cassini's radar imaging also revealed large methane seas on Titan's surface.
If you have liquid methane on the surface in a lake, for example, that methane can evaporate off and become methane gas in the atmosphere. So you have kind of a cycling of methane between liquid phase and gaseous phase and between the surface and the atmosphere. That's very similar to the water cycle that occurs on the Earth.
But methane is a flammable gas. So why isn't Titan on fire?
For any combustion, you need two things. You need both a fuel, which methane is, but you also need oxygen. And on Titan, you lack the oxygen. So the whole thing is basically a big fuel canister, but there's no oxygen with which to burn it, and so it's all very stable.
If it were cold enough here on Earth to produce methane rain, the oxygen in our atmosphere would create a worldwide firestorm. Luckily for us, that can't happen. Titan's methane cycle makes it both alien and familiar to us.
To me, Titan is very exciting because all the materials are so different, and yet these processes produce very similar landscapes to what we see on Earth.
Titan proves that where alien weather is concerned, looks can be deceiving. On Jupiter, it's all about size. Drop the Great Red Spot onto our world, and it makes even our worst hurricanes look like a breeze. This is the biggest and oldest storm in the solar system, and Jupiter's most famous feature. It even has its own name, the Great Red Spot.
It's about 2 or 3 times the size of the Earth, which makes it the mother of all storms.
We've known about the Great Red Spot in Jupiter's southern hemisphere for more than 300 years.
When Galileo invented the telescope, within a few tens of years, people had seen the Great Red Spot, and it's still there.
Familiar yet mysterious. Nobody knows how the Great Red Spot formed. But scientists are finally probing below Jupiter's cloud tops to uncover more about this enormous alien storm. The storm is powerful. With wind speeds of 300 miles per hour, it rises miles above the surrounding clouds. On Earth, we have storms that seem similar, though smaller and milder. Hurricanes. Also known as cyclones or typhoons, depending on where they form. They're our most destructive weather systems. But is there more than just a passing resemblance between Earth's cyclones and Jupiter's red spot?
When you look at the Earth from space at a hurricane, it's this big swirling pattern. It's round, it rotates. Jupiter's big storms look big and round and cloudy and they rotate, but there the similarity ends.
In a hurricane, there is an internal core, which is called the eye of the tropical cyclone, and that's a region of very calm winds and no clouds, and usually has a size of about 10-20 kilometers in diameter. And then away from the eye, there is the eye wall. Those are really cloudy regions with a lot of rain. And as you move outward, there is a whole region of about a couple of 100 kilometers with very, very strong winds and very strong rain.
Hurricanes draw power from heat in our oceans. But Jupiter has no oceans, and the sun isn't close enough to power a storm as big as the Great Red Spot. So where does it get its strength? Part of the answer is Jupiter's size. It's the largest planet in the solar system, almost as big as all the other planets combined. This mass generates a very strong gravitational pull, which in turn creates interior heat that rises to the surface. Another piece of the puzzle may be Jupiter's hypersonic rotation. Despite being much larger than Earth, Jupiter's day lasts only 10 hours. In other words, it spins incredibly fast. Could energy from this dizzying spin feed the Great Red Spot?
The weather is really dominated by this fast spin. There's shearing between different latitudes, and that shearing, plus a lot of heat that comes up from the interior of this very massive object, 290 times the mass of the Earth, leads to very violent storms.
Both Jupiter's and Earth's storms spin around in a familiar spiral shape. On Earth, it's because of an effect called the Coriolis force.
I'm sitting at the North Pole, and I want to throw a ball down to a friend who's in Los Angeles. And so if I threw the ball in that direction, the Earth rotates, and the ball will end up in the middle of the Pacific rather than in Los Angeles. So it's like if the trajectory was deflected to its right. And that's what we call the Coriolis force.
This force spins storms clockwise in our southern hemisphere. But there is a stark difference between Earth and Jupiter. The Great Red Spot is in Jupiter's southern hemisphere, and yet it spins counterclockwise. This is because of some other powerful winds.
It's bounded by jets, which are moving in opposite directions. And so like a cog between two conveyor belts, they're just feeding energy and momentum into the system.
Jupiter's complex jet streams spin the storm into organized chaos. But the greatest difference between Jupiter's red spot and our storms may be Earth's solid surface. Once a hurricane hits land, it comes apart pretty fast.
Where they come over land or over mountains, their behavior is very different from where they form over the oceans, and over warm oceans in particular, where we get hurricanes. And on Jupiter, there's obviously no solid surface.
With no land mass to stop it, the Great Red Spot just keeps on spinning and spinning and spinning. Scientists hope to learn more about our weather by continuing to study the storm.
On Earth, there's a limit to how far ahead you can predict the weather. On Jupiter, we can forecast where the red spot is going to be months in advance. It's practical value to understand what makes weather on Earth so unpredictable, and aspects of the weather on Jupiter are much more predictable.
Unpredictable or not, Earth's weather never gets as violent as on Jupiter. That's lucky for us, because if we shrank the Great Red Spot down to fit on Earth, we'd be in for disaster.
On the Earth, we go up to Category 5 hurricanes, let's think about Category 10 hurricane here. Not much would be left.
Alien storms are vastly different everywhere you go in our solar system. Even our next-door neighbor, Venus. They say we're sister planets. Lucky the resemblance doesn't include weather. Otherwise, we'd get seriously burned. Venus may be our nearest neighbor, but somehow its weather is radically different from ours. The second planet from the Sun is a cross between a toxic waste dump and Death Valley, but even worse.
So it's almost a planetary definition of hell.
The temperature is 900 degrees Fahrenheit. The pressure on the surface is the same as half a mile below the Earth's ocean. And if that's not enough, the upper atmosphere of Venus is choked with sulfuric acid clouds and winds clocked at 250 miles an hour.
To get a comparison for Venus, the best thing to do is climb inside of your oven and crank it up. And then in terms of pressure, you're talking about deep sea diving. It's like nothing. There's nothing comparable on the Earth. It's just a very, very extreme object.
On Venus, there's just no escaping the heat.
If you built up a hot spot on Venus, the massive atmosphere would just carry that heat away and spread it around.
But Venus shines so brightly in the night sky because its thick clouds reflect almost all the sunlight it receives. In fact, some early scientists assumed Venus would have moderate Earth-like temperatures.
When we went by Venus in 1962 with a spacecraft, we thought we would find a surface at 90 degrees Fahrenheit, sort of like Miami, Florida.
We were dead wrong. Something else must be at work on Venus. But what? So why doesn't Venus cool off the same way Earth does?
On the Earth, for example, we have sunlight coming in, hitting the surface of the Earth. Earth warms up a little bit, but the oxygen and the nitrogen in the atmosphere don't impede the light, so when it gets released out in the infrared, it goes right through the atmosphere and leaves and goes into space.
But on Venus, the atmosphere is 97% carbon dioxide, giving a whole new meaning to the greenhouse effect.
It becomes very, very hard for the surface to get its energy out.
So Venus really taught us a lesson, that if you have a blanketing gas, a greenhouse gas, it can warm up the atmosphere tremendously.
But why does Venus have so much more CO2 in its atmosphere than Earth? The two have much in common. They're even called sister planets. They're almost the same size, have roughly the same amount of carbon, and billions of years ago, both had lots of water. But eons ago, their paths mysteriously diverged. On Earth, water fostered life.
The Earth has most of its carbon in life forms, in the trees and the animals. But if you took all that carbon that's in the near-surface rocks and burned it up or released it, you would then create an atmosphere very much like Venus.
Venus's close proximity to the sun made it too hot to sustain liquid water. Instead, its water evaporated into the atmosphere, trapping the heat deposited by the sun and creating a runaway greenhouse effect. Once in the atmosphere, the water molecules were exposed to solar ultraviolet rays that broke the molecules apart.
It really wasn't recognized by the scientific community how important the greenhouse effect was prior to going by Venus and seeing this amazing place where it was 900 degrees Fahrenheit and not 90.
It took several doomed missions to Venus to figure it out. Starting in the 1960s, both the United States and the Soviet Union sent unmanned probes past the planet and down to its surface. It didn't take long before Venus crushed and burned them. Then, in 1981, the Soviet lander Venera 13 set a record for survival on the surface of Venus. 2 hours and 7 minutes. It was able to take pictures and samples of the surface before being overcome by the heat.
You're sitting there with this 900 degrees Fahrenheit heat all around you. It's going to get in there and bake you after a while.
Scientists one day hope to send a probe to Venus that can survive its hellish environment, to help us confirm our theory of how this planet went astray. Because if circumstances were just a little different, our sister planet might just be our twin. Remove our atmospheric shield, and you're on the road to hell.
As soon as you're heated up to something like 400 degrees or so, you'd probably start getting some smoldering smoke, and way before it hit the 900 degrees, the Earth would burst into flames because of all the oxygen around.
Once the oceans boiled away, the carbon locked in rocks on the ocean floor would cook, and over millions of years re-enter the atmosphere.
Probably if you came back to the Earth system after this happened, you'd find a planet looking much like Venus.
We're a long ways away from such a drastic change, but it's sobering to look at Earth's sister planet when the sister planet went on a very different track than we did.
So cosmic forces turned Venus into a planetary barbecue. But on this violent, stormy world, time and the elements have produced some of the strongest thunderstorms ever measured. Welcome to Saturn. lightning cuts the sky. This violent weather system grows bigger than the entire United States as it pummels the atmosphere with the most powerful lightning ever seen. Except this lightning can't be seen, because these bolts are electrifying the skies over Saturn. Despite the raw power of Saturn's lightning, scientists have been unable to see it, partly because Saturn's rings are too bright.
The rings are so bright, if you were on the night side of Saturn, it would be considerably brighter than the Earth under a full moon.
But Saturn also hides its lightning within thick, choking clouds of ammonia.
It's probably 100 kilometers down that the lightning is happening, and that complicates seeing the lightning flashes.
But the lightning is there, and scientists know it because they've heard it. Radio wave detectors on the Cassini orbiter have recorded the sound of Saturn's lightning.
We can hear the static of lightning just as you could with an AM radio going down the highway on Earth.
And this static reveals the power of the lightning that we can't see.
You can measure the energy in those radio waves and compare it with the energy that your radio picks up when there's a thunderstorm around on Earth. And the Saturn ones are big. They're more powerful, maybe 100 times.
And Earth's lightning can help scientists understand how storms work on Saturn. Within Earth's storm clouds, just like in Saturn's, updrafts drive moisture higher, causing ice to form. These ice crystals rub against each other, take on a positive charge, and become attracted to negatively charged water droplets lower in the cloud. This sets the stage for a potentially powerful discharge of energy.
Once you get that charge separation that builds up so intensely that some theorize that it can be as strong as 100 million volts, that the cloud then must release that energy.
On Saturn, the same thing happens on a much larger scale. In fact, the lightning is 100 times stronger than Earth's. That's a staggering 10 billion volts of electricity. Thunderstorms in Saturn's southern hemisphere span thousands of miles and can last as long as a month. But scientists aren't sure what makes Saturn's storms bigger and longer lasting. It could be Saturn's supersaturated atmosphere.
Probably the fact that there's more water in the atmosphere, pound for pound, on Saturn makes the storms bigger.
More water droplets means more friction, which means bigger lightning bolts. But energy emerging from the planet may also contribute to the power in Saturn's thunderstorms.
It turns out that where Lightning Alley is on Saturn is a place where the winds are flowing the slowest. If you go deep down in the atmosphere, you'll see the same winds as you do up high. It's a place where the energy being released deep down below can make it on up to the upper atmosphere without being sheared apart, and allows storm systems to be organized.
Earth's atmosphere isn't built that way. So, as violent as our storms get, they're nothing compared to the systems on Saturn. Even a run-of-the-mill mega thunderstorm on Saturn would devastate us here.
A Saturn-sized thunderstorm on the Earth would mean a thunderstorm that grows to cover all of North America and presumably has very strong winds and rain. This is something that's unprecedented on the Earth.
Saturn's hyper-violent thunderstorms are proof that our planetary neighbors have weather far more ferocious than ours. But the laws of physics that create Saturn's storms are the same laws that create our own weather. Massive dust storms, unrelenting winds, killer lightning, powerful hurricanes, and searing heat.
2004. The Cassini space probe approaches the ringed planet Saturn and its 56 moons. It discovers something almost unimaginable, conditions that might support life. And if those conditions could exist so close by, what might we find in the next galaxy? On a planet just like Earth. For millennia, we humans have looked to the skies and wondered whether we're alone in the universe. Today, we're closer than ever to knowing the answer. Some scientists believe we'll get our first look at our extraterrestrial cousins in the near future.
I hope it's in the next 10 years, and I'm ready for it next week. So, the sooner the better.
What's more, we could find these aliens not on distant planets in unexplored galaxies, but right next door in our own solar system. Scientists are now honing in on proof that ET is out there and living on the most hazardous of worlds. Our safari will journey to 7 destinations in our solar system to see just where these creatures could be and what they might look like. These exotic lands are unimaginably harsh. Life as we think of it would perish in an instant. But alien life may be far tougher than we expect, as we're learning from a surprising group of living things right here on Earth. Until just a few decades ago, we were sure our planet was unique. It is the only one we've found so far that has nurtured the evolution of millions of species. Thanks to its abundant sunshine, warm water, and protective atmosphere. We logically concluded that life needed each of those things, a conclusion that ruled out all other known worlds in our solar system. But then, biologists began combing some of the Earth's darkest and coldest places. And to their surprise, they found living, breathing creatures. Biologists call these organisms extremophiles. Some don't need light or oxygen. Others survive in tremendous atmospheric pressure. It seems life can turn up practically anywhere. Take Antarctica. After years of searching this arid, frozen landscape, scientists doubted they'd find anything alive. But in 1999, a team of explorers unearthed a rock from 6 feet under the ice. What they found amazed them. When they cracked the rock open, they found it teeming with tiny creatures. Here, at temperatures of 68 degrees below zero and 6 feet under solid ice, life had found a foothold.
Biologists have been increasingly discovering life, not kangaroos, but, simpler forms of life that live at very cold temperatures, very high temperatures, very great pressures, even in places where there's sort of a high degree of radiation. It turns out life is able to live in a much wider variety of environments on our own planet than we used to think.
And if life can survive extreme conditions, not just here at home, but elsewhere in our solar system, think of what this could mean.
Unless there's something extraordinarily miraculous about our solar system or our planet, then life has got to be extremely commonplace. I mean, there's got to be large numbers of worlds with life, and some of them would have cooked up intelligent life.
In In the beginning, our Earth was as deadly a planet as any. Over the first billion years of Earth's existence, cosmic debris pummeled it mercilessly. The impacts turned its surface into a broiling, seething inferno where life was impossible. But once the solar system settled down and the Earth began to cool, water appeared, setting the stage for life. In 1953, researcher Stanley Miller proved in a lab experiment just how easily life on Earth got its start. He combined water with hydrogen, methane, and ammonia, components of the Earth's early atmosphere. Then he zapped his solution with an electric charge to simulate lightning. His results shocked the world. Miller had created organic molecules called amino acids, the protein building blocks of all living things. If lightning helped jumpstart life on Earth, could it have done the same on other planets? Galactic probes have now found the ingredients in Miller's experiment throughout our solar system, including one essential to life.
One of the requirements that every form of life that we know about on Earth has, every single one, is liquid water. We've used evidence for liquid water to kind of guide our search for habitable environments.
Our safari is headed to 7 worlds, some possibly rich in water, where scientists believe aliens might be hiding. While any life there might have begun much like life on Earth, how it looks now is anyone's guess. We begin in the world that has always fired our imaginations, the planet right next door, Mars. Of all the planets where we've looked for life, it's the one we've studied most. The scientist who may get the first look at Martians, if they're found, is Steve Squires, principal investigator for NASA's Mars rovers.
Mars has always had, among all the planets, I think, a special fascination for humans. For a very long time, we've known enough about Mars to know that it is probably the most Earth-like.
It may be the most like Earth, with an atmosphere and seasons, but we humans would perish quickly on Mars. Its air is thin, 40 times thinner than the air at the top of Mount Everest. And it sits in a bad neighborhood of our solar system, near an asteroid belt. Its atmosphere is too flimsy to protect it. Asteroids continually bombard its surface. Violent winds can whip Mars's sandy soil into storms that consume the entire planet for weeks and spawn tornadoes 8 kilometers high. Midday temperatures at the equator of 1 degree Celsius fall to -70 at night. David Grinspoon is a curator of astrobiology at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. As he sees it, Mars would be warmer if it wasn't a planetary runt.
When I grab coffee on a cold morning, I know that a small espresso is going to cool off quickly, whereas a larger coffee is going to stay warm much longer. Large objects stay warm longer because their interiors are shielded from the outside where the cooling occurs. And planets are exactly the same way. A small planet will cool off early in its history. A larger planet like Earth will stay warm for billions of years, which makes it a better place probably to look for life.
Despite Mars's drawbacks, it has always fascinated scientists because its terrain seemed to give evidence that it might support life. Its dynamic landscape of mountains, volcanoes, and deep ravines is not unlike our Earth. To early astronomers, these features look like oceans and rivers, and even a system of canals. supposedly not just supporting life, but actually produced by it.
Percival Lowell in the United States observed these things and inferred that, in fact, these things were so straight and so regular in geometry that they had to have been the product of intelligent life. Okay? Well, he was right. The problem was the life was at the wrong end of the telescope. In viewing this thing visually through a telescope eyepiece, the human eye-brain combination started to connect things that weren't really there.
Lowell was not alone. Some scientists were shocked when the probe Viking 1 beamed back this image. Is that a human face? Perhaps produced by Martians in their own likeness? Until recently, we've never really known where to look in our solar system for extraterrestrial life. But we've always known what the aliens would be like once we found them.
Consciousness. I was on a table.
Usually, there is more than a hint of the Earthling in our aliens. Hostile or lovable, they tend to resemble mutant images of ourselves. As a senior astronomer at the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence Institute in California, Seth Shostak has spent his career listening for the radio waves of a distant alien society.
There's no reason to assume that they're going to look like us or even think like us or behave like us or have language. You know, you just have to look at the variety of life on Earth and you see that, you know, nature can come up with lots of different forms.
But if there is life on Mars, how could it survive in such extreme conditions? Since the 1960s, scientists have sent dozens of probes to the Red Planet. The first pictures of the barren landscape quickly dashed any hope of finding intelligent beings. But what scientists did see startled them. Though there's no evidence of Martian-made canals, there are signs that Mars actually may have had water. Some think the angry red planet might once have been blue.
You just have to look back a couple of billion years, 3.5 billion, 4 billion years ago. Mars had a thicker atmosphere, had water on its surface clearly. Maybe it developed life. And as it slowly went bad, you know, the life had to adapt.
Life may have adapted, not died off, because some liquid water may still exist underground. But with no surface water, frigid temperatures, and ultra-thin atmosphere, Mars is a planet only one kind of creature could love: an extremophile. Extremophiles thrive in the cruelest of places. To see where they might lurk on Mars, we head to the Valles Marineris, a massive rift in Mars's surface, 20 times wider than the Grand Canyon in places, and almost as deep as Mount Everest is tall. Lakes may have once flooded this valley, and those lakes could have hosted life. As the water dried up, life could have evolved to cope with the harsher environment. We won't know what these extremophiles are like until we find them. But they may resemble creatures that exist in extreme places right here on Earth. An unusual team of biologists, called astrobiologists, study Earth for the kinds of life we may find in outer space. Astrobiologist Rocco Mancinelli is on the hunt for Mars's extremophiles.
If it went beneath the surface, and some of it undoubtedly did, then what happened to it? Well, it formed brine pockets. So what kind of organism can live in a salty brine? A salt-loving organism.
Astrobiologist Chris McKay thinks he knows the kind of salt-loving creatures that might survive on Mars. Creatures much like those he's found in one of the driest, saltiest places on Earth.
The fundamental challenge to life on Mars is
in a sense, the fundamental challenge of life here in Death Valley. It's dryness. That is the hardest thing for life to adapt to.
Thousands of years ago, a salty lake covered Death Valley, just as lakes filled Mars's Mariner Trench.
Move in closer. This is still wet, a little wet.
This appears like a lifeless place, a big, flat, white, empty horizon. But yet, just below the surface, we find layers of algae and bacteria growing. They're living in an environment that in many ways is fundamentally different from the environment that we sense on the surface. Here you're in a place which looks lifeless, looks dead, and yet you dig down and hidden underneath, there it is.
Beneath the salt is a layer of hardy green algae that survive on the water and light that trickle through. The algae in turn feeds salt-loving microorganisms.
Here in deserts on Earth, dried, salty lake beds, we're going to find them on Mars as well.
Salty deserts are not the only places life might be hiding on the red planet. There are Mars's tremendous volcanoes, some of them 6 times larger than those on Earth. Astrobiologist Penny Boston studies the caves, called lava tubes, left over after volcanic lava has dissipated. Not long ago, we assumed caves like these were devoid of life. They get no sunlight, and no sunlight means no photosynthesis. But in lava tubes outside Albuquerque, New Mexico, Boston has found evidence of extreme life.
Because we know Mars has many, many lava tubes. And so here we have the opportunity to see how these formed and also to look at the life that inhabits them.
The extremophiles Boston has found appear to be thriving. They get their energy by feeding on the minerals in the cave wall.
So here we're up close to the wall, and you can see these white patches here growing against the black basalt. And each one of these is like a major city for these little guys. And they're all nestled in these little pockets in the basalt. And so these guys are permanently adapted to these freezing temperatures. They never see any light, and they get what they can find in the environment.
Are there creatures like these in the caves below Mars's volcano fields? Boston thinks so.
We are going to find life, and I just hope that I live a long and healthy life so that I can still be around to see that.
We may already have had our first glimpse of Martians, not from our visit to their planet, but from their visit to ours. 16 million years ago, an asteroid slammed into Mars and propelled a 2-kilogram rock into space. Amazingly, that rock sailed to Earth and came to rest in Antarctica. Inside, NASA scientist David McKay and Everett Gibson were amazed to spot the outlines of fossils. Water has carved small tunnels in the rock. And in these tunnels, McKay and Gibson found what they believed to be evidence of bacterial life.
These are little microbes, and they're dead, and they're fossils, or in some cases, we don't even see the forms. We see the footprints or the evidence that they were there.
Life from Mars? Maybe. The hunt is only just beginning. NASA plans to send a rover called Phoenix to Mars. It will study the planet's ice cap and probe 3 feet beneath the surface. NASA even has a plan to send human visitors. They may not meet the little green men of our imaginations, but they could encounter life in some form. What will it look like? It is likely to be a subterranean dweller with an ability to survive on little water. Perhaps an organism with a taste for minerals, like the creatures in the lava tubes of New Mexico. Even the smallest find would have enormous implications. proof that life is not unique to Earth, but exists just next door. Our safari to the places in our solar system likely to harbor alien life now takes us past the asteroid belt on the far side of Mars. Here, Jupiter reigns. But this planet, the largest in our solar system, is fairly hostile to life, thanks to its toxic gases and overpowering gravity.
Not only is it pretty cold out at Jupiter, it's also, it's got this really thick atmosphere, tens of thousands of miles thick, and it's got ammonia and methane and, things used to clean the bathroom. But Jupiter has more than 60 moons that we know about.
At first glance, those moons would seem unlikely places to seek alien life. Their atmospheres are thin, and they are inhumanly cold. The temperature on Callisto is lower than minus 200 degrees Celsius. The scientific probes Voyager and Galileo have detected little on the surface of these moons but ice, with one dramatic exception. Io is one of the closest moons to Jupiter. When NASA sent Voyager 1 to Io in 1979, astronomers were astonished to find its surface roiling with giant volcanoes.
Io is the most volcanically active place in the solar system, just spewing volcanic material from its surface all the time.
What could be heating the interior of this frigid moon? Amazingly, it's the force of gravity from Jupiter. The giant planet exerts enormous gravitational pull on its moons. The closer the moon, the stronger the force. So strong, it can actually stretch their crusts. But some of these moons have elliptical orbits, so as they near Jupiter, the crust stretches towards it. When they move further away, the crust relaxes back towards spherical. This constant tidal movement creates friction deep inside, and that friction generates heat. It's like rubbing two sticks together to start a fire. The pull of Jupiter is heating Io from the inside out. Volcanic fumes and lack of water make Io inhospitable to life. But Jupiter's other large moons are more distant, close enough for Jupiter's gravity to warm them from within, but distant enough to remain calm on the surface. 3 of them look particularly promising as possible homes for alien life. The one furthest from the giant planet, Callisto. On its surface, Callisto looks like our moon, scarred and cratered by countless hits from asteroids. Those impacts may have melted the surface ice for brief periods, allowing life to take hold. But in 1998, the Galileo spacecraft detected a much more promising incubator deep beneath Callisto's surface. Radioactive rocks and tremendous pressure in its core generate heat inside Callisto. The heat may be melting its icy crust from below, creating a hidden ocean. And hidden oceans could mean hidden life. As we fly closer to Jupiter, we find its largest moon, Ganymede. Ganymede is also deeply scarred. Ridges rise above its surface. Those bright spots are craters as big as 5 kilometers across and likely to be lined with frost. But these photos offer the most compelling clues to where life here might hide. They show flowing glaciers, glaciers that resemble those on Earth. Ganymede's moving glaciers could also be signs of heat within. So, like Callisto, Ganymede could also have a hidden ocean, buried beneath as much as 190 kilometers of ice. The third moon on this leg of our alien safari is the most intriguing. It is called Europa, and of the three, it resides closest to Jupiter. That proximity to the giant planet means Europa's core may be very hot, far hotter than Callisto's or Ganymede's. But its surface remains frigid, a potent combination for life, since there could be a temperate zone where they meet. Mammoth fissures scar Europa's thick crust of ice, a sign that ice is always shifting. On our own planet, we see the same cracks in the ice sheets covering the Arctic Ocean. Europa's crust may be riding the largest ocean in the solar system, an ocean twice as large as all of Earth's put together.
Now, those oceans, if they're there, and the chances are pretty good that at least some of them are, they've been sitting around for a long time, 4 billion years, a little longer, right? In 4 billion years, an ocean of water, do you think anything might have cooked up there? Well, it certainly seems plausible.
The environment in Europa's ocean is more or less as nice as the environment in our own ocean, as a place for living things to exist. Heck, things from planet Earth could probably live in the European Ocean.
But Europa's oceans would be very cold, even slushy. And sunlight never penetrates them, thanks to an icy cover that may be 16 kilometers thick. We might never have thought life could exist here if not for a revolutionary discovery off the coast of Ecuador. Deep in the Pacific, biologists have found flourishing communities of tube worms, crabs, and even squid. These creatures are thriving despite complete darkness, extreme cold, and the pressure of the deep ocean. They feed on bacteria that take their energy not from the sun, but from chemicals erupting from the sea floor. We might find very similar volcanic vents on Europa, supporting their own web of life. To find out, NASA scientists would like to put a lander on the European surface. Some would like to send a cryobot, a robot that would melt the ice and release a probe into the liquid below.
That's not so hard to do. You just have to melt your way through. But you're going to have to melt your way through not a couple hundred feet, but maybe a dozen miles of ice. And send down a fishing line with maybe a video camera and a light bulb on it and look around.
In all that water, we can't rule out the possibility that very simple life forms have evolved further. We might even find creatures as advanced as some here at home. Most likely, however, we would find microbes. But even that would be a sea change in how we view the birth and growth of life. Europa was warm. What if the place is one of the coldest known? Or if its lakes flow with toxic chemicals instead of water? These are the worlds we find as our safari continues even deeper into space. As our safari in search of alien life sweeps by the ringed planet, Saturn, we can see the violently swirling gases that choke its atmosphere. We can also feel Saturn's gravity, weaker than Jupiter's, but still formidable. We'll keep moving. We're not likely to find living things here. Saturn's rings are also extremely inhospitable. They're made of rock and ice, as small as a grain of sugar or as big as a house. But Saturn has many moons, 56 that we've spotted so far. Our safari heads first to one of those moons, a tiny frigid satellite called Enceladus, just 500 kilometers in diameter. Here, gravity is very weak, a fraction of that on Earth. And Enceladus has hardly any atmosphere. It reflects back into space almost all the sunlight that hits it, making it the shiniest object in our solar system. Until very recently, we also thought Enceladus was too cold to support life. It appears we were wrong. In 2005, after a 7-year journey, the Cassini spacecraft approached the tiny moon and detected something that stunned the mission's principal investigator, Caroline Porco.
So this was the picture that just, grabbed us. Just was shocking.
Those are plumes made of water from a geyser. The geyser's steam and hot water hit the cold vacuum of space and explode into a jet of ice. With little gravity to rein it in, the ice cloud can grow as big as Enceladus itself. Porco has never seen anything like it anywhere else.
It's like a planetary explorer's dream to come upon a body like Enceladus. Those jets, those fountains, if you will, just spewing vapor and icy snow hundreds of kilometers above the south pole of Enceladus.
There's only one conclusion. Tiny, frigid Enceladus is piping hot within. Like Jupiter, Saturn's giant gravitational field tugs on its satellites, creating friction deep within.
As far as we can tell now, it seems like an inescapable conclusion that there may be liquid water deeper down on Enceladus because it's warm. And the best knowledge we can put forth right now is even it's warm, much less the jets, seems to indicate that the depth is warm enough to water.
Liquid water, even the furthest reaches of our solar system, may contain the chemistry for life. What kind of creature could live in steaming waters of a geyser? Thanks to hot springs back on Earth, we have some idea. At one point, we assumed nothing lived in the steam-driven fountains of Yellowstone National Park. But then, biologists discovered microbes in these waters. Microbes that feed on chemicals dissolved in the water. Today, we call them thermophiles. Hardest and boiling water. Could there be thermophiles on Enceladus? To find out, our safari takes us in for a close-up of this extraterrestrial giant thinking. It's too cold for anything to live on the surface. The temperatures there are minus 165 degrees Celsius. But what about the hot water inside? In the ice moon above Enceladus, Cassini's probes have found carbon dioxide and methane, chemicals that could feed life below. Just as the chemical-laden springs of Yellowstone feed microbes living there.
We have a body that very, very likely has liquid water in its interior. Has shown us already it's got simple organic compounds and, a whole host of things that make it, I think, a major body of astrobiological interest in our solar system.
If Enceladus has been a shock, astronomers have been astounded by another of Saturn's moons, Titan. It may be the unlikeliest to harbor life. Titan gets only a limited amount of sunlight, about 1,000th as much as Earth. Probes sent to Titan have detected ice, but no liquid water. And at temperatures of minus 138 degrees Celsius, that ice is hard as stone. What could possibly make Titan a promising environment for alien life? Remarkably, Titan in many ways resembles the Earth, but not the one we know now.
Titan has turned out to be the body fantastic in the Saturn system, which is long suspected of having an environment at the surface, not only similar to the kind of environment we find here on Earth, even, believe it or not, similar to the kind of environment we had on Earth before the emergence of life.
Titan intrigued Caroline Porco's team so much they directed the Cassini spacecraft to send a probe there in 2005. It was the most distant surface mission ever conducted. The probe saw just ridges and plains. But a later flyover by Cassini spotted a shoreline. Soon, thousands of lakes came into view, at least one bigger than the Great Lakes of North America. It's the first time we've ever detected liquid on the surface of another celestial body.
Kind of looks like Minnesota, except the lakes are not water. They're liquid natural gas. But liquid natural gas is a liquid.
And that's not snow. Those are methane flakes. Like Earth, Titan has weather. But it's of a rather psychedelic kind. There are even methane hurricanes.
It's not water, it's methane, doing all the exact same things. Raining, evaporating, flowing in rivers. So you have something that is basically doing what water does on Earth. On Titan, only it's methane.
A similar scene may have existed on Earth 4 billion years ago, making scientists suspect that Titan could also be an incubator for life.
Chemistry does go on. At those cold temperatures, it's really slow. But Titan has had 4 billion years in which to do some chemistry, and maybe in that period of time, maybe something is cooked up.
It would have to cook up without liquid water, something we've never seen before. But scientists aren't ruling it out. The substitute could be the methane, so abundant on Titan. Used for fuel on Earth, methane was long thought poisonous to all life. But in 1997, researchers examined mounds of methane ice in the Gulf of Mexico, and they were astonished to find colonies of small centipede-like worms thriving amid the frozen substance. They think the worms may eat bacteria that feed on the methane.
In general, things that we think of as deadly, many of them are potentially lively if you can figure out an evolutionary way to tap into that energy rather than having it destroy you. Then it can be bountiful.
There could be one more complication for life on the surface of Titan. With only a weak magnetic field to shield it, living things on the surface could be exposed to cosmic radiation. But that might not be a problem for an extremophile, as we found here on Earth. Biologists have uncovered plenty of life near Chernobyl's contaminated nuclear reactor, and even swimming in toxic radioactive spills, actually feeding off the decaying molecules. It's possible Titan's life forms could do the same. To find life on Titan, we may have to dive into its methane lakes, where we might find chemical-loving bacteria. We may even find microbes resistant to radiation, not unlike those here on Earth at Chernobyl, living on its rock-hard ice sheets. Organisms that eat methane might give off heat, melting the ice, possibly creating another fountain for life. There's no doubt, life on Titan would be a strange brew. But we have yet to visit the most bizarre world where scientists believe life could exist, and it's much closer to home. Our safari of the world's most likely to harbor alien life has taken us far. We've visited frigid deserts, submerged oceans, and methane lakes. But the world we are about to visit may be the most extreme of all. For our final stop, we are turning back toward Earth, to Venus, our closest planetary neighbor in the solar system. If life can survive here, it seems it could exist almost everywhere. To reach the surface of Venus, we have to fly through a dense layer of yellow clouds, 64 kilometers deep, with a composition similar to battery acid. The atmosphere here is 90 times heavier than Earth's, too heavy for a human to tolerate. On the ground, there are extinct volcanoes and lava flows as far as the eye can see. They cover 85% of the planet's surface. It is hard to believe Venus once had vast oceans.
You basically had a runaway greenhouse effect where as it starts to get warmer, the oceans start to evaporate, and then that puts water vapor in the air. Well, water vapor is a potent greenhouse gas, so that's what leads to the runaway. The oceans basically boil off, and then the CO2 all ends up in the atmosphere, and so today you have this very hot, hyper greenhouse planet.
With temperatures around 460 degrees Celsius, Venus is even hotter than Mercury, the planet closest to the Sun. Not a surface hospitable to life.
Life as we know it cannot exist on the surface of Venus because organic molecules would just be ripped to shreds by the hot gases.
But we've stopped here, not because of what's on the ground, but what's in the air. In 1982, the Soviet spacecraft Venera 14 visited Venus. In the clouds, 50 kilometers up, it detected temperatures much cooler than on the surface. What's more, it found the molecules so critical for life, H2O. So far, every bit of water we've found beyond Earth is frozen solid. Only in the clouds above Venus have we found it in vapor form, a possible incubator for life. But Venus's clouds are also filled with highly acidic sulfur. Once, we thought nothing could live in sulfur. But scientists have analyzed some of the most acidic water on Earth, leaching from a California mine.
Watch your head. That's sulfuric acid.
In sulfuric acid strong enough to erode metal, eat through clothing, and dissolve human flesh, they found life. Acid-loving extremophiles. These organisms feed on sulfur compounds, like iron sulfide, eating the iron and emitting the highly acidic sulfur. Do extremophiles like these float above Venus? Astrobiologist David Grinspoon likes to think it's possible.
Maybe in the clouds of Venus there are some sulfur-based organisms. Sulfur actually absorbs ultraviolet light in interesting ways, and I'm just imagining that there's maybe some kind of photochemical reaction going on where ultraviolet light is actually being used to convert chemicals into some higher energy state, which then is basically being eaten.
What will these aliens be like if we do find them? They would have to tolerate high temperatures and enormous atmospheric pressure. They would also need to thrive in acid concentrations deadly to most life forms. Perhaps they might resemble a hardier version of the acid-resistant extremophiles in California's mine.
We keep finding that life lives in places that we used to think were inhospitable. So whenever we say, oh, it's impossible, you couldn't have life in the clouds of Venus, I think we have to be very careful because they might just reflect our own ignorance or our limitations on our own imagination, and maybe not real limitations on the ultimate creativity of nature, which seems to find solutions to these problems.
As our safari returns to the cool, blue, lush and lively world of Earth, we can see why we so revere its life-sustaining gifts. But, as we are learning, even the most extreme environments can harbor living things. Extremophiles may resemble the first version of life in our universe, and they could even be the most common. Could they have evolved further from these humble beginnings? Could intelligent life be out there as well? For more than 40 years, scientists at the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence Institute in California have been searching the skies for answers to that question. Astronomer Seth Shostak believes he'll know the sound of alien life when he hears it.
We have a couple of observing projects to try and find signals. The biggest one are our radio searchers, and that's where we use big arrays of antennas, and we point these antennas at nearby star systems that we think, well, this is the kind of star that might have a planet, that might be something like Earth. We point in those directions, hoping to pick up a signal that would tell us that somebody there is clever enough to build a radio transmitter.
It's a safari that never leaves home. Astronomers have also recently captured enough light from planets in distant solar systems to deduce their chemical makeup. They have found elements that may help form RNA, one of the building blocks of life here on Earth. And 20 light years away, in the constellation Libra, a team of European astronomers has found a planet that could be warm enough to have liquid water on its surface, just like Earth. Meanwhile, headed to the furthest reaches of our galaxy are 4 spacecraft launched in the 1970s. Aboard 2 of them is a map of our solar system and the image of a man and a woman. 2 others carry a sample of uranium, whose rate of decay would date the probe, regardless of language. The 2 are also carrying what could be the most universal message of all, a recording that includes a composition by Bach. Just don't expect news anytime soon. These intergalactic postcards from the Earth will take 80,000 years to reach the nearest star. Our search for life beyond Earth has only just begun. There are billions of planets yet to be explored. Every one of them holds the tantalizing possibility of life. Even intelligent life.
Just in the face of this enormity, the idea that we're the only game in town, it just doesn't seem reasonable.
I think the question of whether we're alone is profoundly important for human beings in general. If you're aware, you really have to ask that question.
Somewhere in a galaxy known or unknown, something or someone could be looking out into space, peering at the Milky Way and wondering, is there life out there?
Walked into a Las Vegas TV station and gave a remarkable interview. He said that he'd worked out in the Nevada desert at a top-secret facility known as Area 51. He said he worked on a highly classified project, reverse engineering recovered alien spacecraft. His story was a worldwide sensation, and Area 51 became a household name, synonymous with UFOs, secret projects, and little green men. And yet, neither the US government nor its military have ever denied his claims, and they still don't officially confirm that Area 51 exists, despite satellite photos proving it does. Many dismiss Bob Lazar as a fantasist, and yet others see him as a whistleblower, exposing a government cover-up of UFOs and alien contact.
A once secret airbase in the Nevada desert is marking an unofficial anniversary today.
Area 51 was one of the most secretive places on the planet, but that anonymity vanished forever because of what happened 25 years ago. A controversial electronics whiz told a fantastic tale during a TV interview, and the story still reverberates today.
The I-Team's George Knapp played a part in what became an international sensation. He's here with an update.
Setting the stage, Dave, you might not know this, but 25 years ago, a young anchorwoman named Paula Francis and I were
prepping for the 5 o'clock news when we learned that our scheduled live interview had canceled. We placed a call to aviator John Lear to ask if he could get a friend of his to fill the spot, a guy who reportedly worked out near Area 51 and had seen flying saucers out there. It sounded outrageous at the time, but that interview with Bob Lazar turned Area 51 upside down. We coaxed a reluctant Lazar into returning to Las Vegas to talk about it.
I don't know. Sometimes I really do regret it, and I almost feel like apologizing to him, saying that, you know, I'm sorry I let things out. Can I have my job back?
My personal opinion, based on comments I've gotten from the Deputy Director for Science and Technology at CIA, would seem to indicate that Bob was perhaps an unwitting participant in a program designed to introduce someone with a technical background to some elements of the UFO research projects going on out at the test site.
I have no doubts that Lazar actually was in a place where top secret investigations were going on. I'm not sure about all the details that have emerged from his account, but he certainly gives me the impression that he was actually there.
Do I believe Bob Lazar? My answer to that is yes. And heck, it's going on 8 years that I've known him. His story has never changed. He wasn't in it for publicity. He surely wasn't in it for the money. He lost everything he had. I believe he's totally sincere.
As far as I can tell, he's a bright guy who tells a great tale and who's told it often to people who have not checked on him, who accept the notion that, well, the government wiped his slate clean.
Basically, I think he had an experience. I think he saw some things that shocked him, was subject to some conditions and experiences that were very unnerving to him and very profound.
He said, you would love to see what's out there because it's like beyond science fiction. He said, and I wish I could talk to you about it, but I can't. And that's as close as he ever got to telling me anything that happened out there.
You'll find many people who have seen these discs. Question is, where do they come from? Bob Lazar may be one of the few people who can tell us that they're from somewhere else.
I've no doubt that there's a relatively small number of people within the intelligence, military intelligence and scientific and technical intelligence community who are aware of what's going on, and an even smaller group who are actually organizing top secret research into this phenomenon.
There's been an operating airbase out at the location known as Area 51 since the 1950s, when it was home to the CIA's top secret SR-71 Blackbird spy plane. Then in the 1970s, it became the test flight center for the F-117 stealth fighter and the B-2 stealth bomber.
It's fairly public knowledge that we have a super secret facility in the mountains in northern Nevada, referred to as Groom Lake, Area 51 of the Nellis Air Force Base test range. It's also been referred to as Dreamland. This is an area that has been known but officially denied for many decades. all of our super secret aircraft have been developed and test flown out in this particular area. So it only makes sense that if you have something as sophisticated as a flying saucer and the related technology to that, that would certainly be one of the prime locations you'd want to go.
What you see is an ordinary looking Air Force base. It's nothing to write home about, but because the government won't talk about it, everyone wants to see it. The military has never said there are no UFOs. It's never directly denied any of the Area 51 stories. It would have been so simple when these claims came out, these Papoose Lake claims, for the military to simply say, look, we have nothing there. They could take a few reporters to this area and show them nothing there. The military hasn't done it. The military has stonewalled. It has remained silent. And that's the most damning thing that they can do.
Area 51 to this day is not acknowledged. That is to say, the Air Force does not admit that it exists. This status has been maintained very carefully, particularly in the last few years. The puzzle is that the base has clearly been very active for quite a while, and you can see that there are about 700 to 1,000 people traveling from Las Vegas every day. So essentially the bulk of what has gone on there in the last 10 years has not emerged from the black.
This airplane was, the program was terminated. The airplanes were put in mothballs for 20 years before they admitted the existence of the aircraft. There's programs that they're working on today that are 50 years ahead of anything that you and I can even conceive of, and that we may never, may never see the light of day.
Would you say it's America's most top secret military base?
As far as an operational test facility, it's probably the most secret test facility in the free world, yes.
So there is no question that the facility is there, that the government has said very little in the past about it. Now, the real question, I suppose, is, are there any flying saucers out there?
No one had associated flying saucers with Area 51 until Bob Lazar's interview hit television screens around the world. He said that he worked at an underground facility called S4. The top secret project was codenamed Galileo.
They would call it a specific time. For instance, the operator would say, Mr. Lazar, it's now 4:15 a.m. We expect you to be at McCarran Airport at 4:45. Your plane will be leaving at such and such time. I'd drive there, check in, board the plane, and the plane would fly out to Groom Lake. It would land there. I'd get off the plane and wait, and there would be a bus to take me and whoever else was going to S4, Papoose Lake, which is about 15 miles south of there. And then I would check in at S4.
Tell me about how you felt on your very first trip out.
The first trip out there, it was actually very exciting because it seemed so cloak and dagger to me, especially after I got in the bus with the blacked out windows. I kind of thought that was neat. Drove out to the site, and then it was checked in, guards walking around with guns, and I was sure what I was working on was going to be pretty fascinating.
He says that within a few days of working out at S4, he was shown an actual flying disc in one of the hangars.
When I was brought in by bus, and for the first time, one of the hangar doors, the one on the end, was open. The bus drove up and we stopped there, and clear as day in the hangar, taking up almost all the hangar, was the disc. Looked like something right out of a science fiction movie. And as I walked in there, I thought, well, this is the new advanced aircraft we've been working on, and this is why people keep seeing flying saucers, because it's ours, and we've just been testing it, probably for all these years.
And what color and size was it?
It was a dull stainless steel, pewter gray, very unimpressive color-wise, about 52.8 feet in diameter and about 16 feet high.
So was it actually a recovered craft that you were working on, or was it one that scientists had built as a mock-up of a recovered craft?
Well, whether it was recovered, given, or what, it was not built as a mock-up. It was an alien craft built on another world. There was absolutely no doubt about that.
Lazar claims that he was one of only 22 people who had something called majestic clearance to work on the craft itself.
The whole aim of the project was to take these craft, or the one in particular that I was working on, and try and duplicate its systems and subsystems with earthly materials. The work that I did basically entailed back engineering the power and propulsion system, and I opted to start with the power, the reactor that ran the craft.
I knew immediately if his credentials could be verified, if even part of his story could be verified, it'd be one tremendous expose.
George Knapp was a long-standing TV reporter. He'd heard enough of the UFO rumors over the years to appreciate how big a scoop this could be if Lazar was telling the truth.
He gave me information about his background, educational background, and employment background. I started with his claim to have worked at Los Alamos Lab. We went to Los Alamos and got nothing even close to cooperation. They wouldn't respond to our phone calls. They say, we have no information on Bob Lazar. There's nothing in the files. I said, are you sure now? No, nothing in the files. I showed them the phone book entry that Bob had kept that said he was there. I showed him the newspaper article that showed that he was there. Basically, Los Alamos Lab tried to thwart me at every step. Were completely uncooperative in trying to get information about Bob, and I found that to be the case at every step of the way in trying to verify his background.
Thursday, 12:37 p.m.
Former NASA mission specialist Bob Exler had heard about Area 51 and Groom Lake when he worked on the Apollo and Space Shuttle projects. He was intrigued by Lazar's claims and started to investigate.
I did a variety of research relative to Bob Lazar. I actually met him. I obtained a copy of his what they call a W-2 form, which is one of the IRS documents associated with pay. His particular form indicated that he worked for the U.S. Department of Naval Intelligence. They informed me that it was a genuine document. It was not something that had been fabricated. There were a variety of numbers, contract numbers and so forth issued on the document, which I was able to research, again finding that these were highly classified numbers. In fact, Internal Revenue Service ran into a brick wall when it came to trying to track down the actual employer associated with the document. And then again, with the Social Security Administration, we found that Bob Lazar's records had in fact been bleached clean. There was nothing there, in spite of the fact that the document clearly indicated that Social Security taxes had been taken out of his pay.
everyone who's researched Bob Lazar believes his claims. Stanton Friedman is one of the most respected authors in the UFO field today. He's a former nuclear physicist with top secret clearance and has many friends and contacts in the Black Project world.
I've looked at considerable depth into Bob Lazar's claims, both about himself and about propulsion system, because they're fairly elaborate claims. I've talked to the schools that he claims to have received degrees from. I've checked on his high school record. I talked to Los Alamos Lab where he was supposedly a scientist and so forth. I have come up totally empty. Now, when a guy lies like that, you get very wary. And, you know, it has all the trimmings, his story, of a Walter Mitty story. Somebody whose imagination was, you know, stronger, brighter, faster than anybody else. I don't doubt that he did some work at Los Alamos and other places. He's clever. He drives a jet-powered car, fixes radiation detectors. So he may have performed some service, but I can find no reason to think that he worked out there on a flying saucer.
I mean, I had to wonder whether this guy was making this stuff up, but then I see the phone book and I see the newspaper article, and I talked to people who worked with Bob at the lab and who said, in fact, that he did work on classified projects, yet no one can find any records of his background.
The people that I worked with, colleagues, the people I went to school with, obviously knew I was there, and people at Los Alamos, I was friends with, and people that worked under me and alongside of me knew I was there and, you know, cooperate what was going on. But, you know, officially, it's very difficult to get information for the people in charge.
To further prove his claims, Lazar agreed to take a polygraph test, which he passed.
The thing that is interesting about polygraph is that if you're embellishing or if you don't completely believe what you're saying, it is very, very easy to detect. All it really will tell you is that the individual believes with 100% conviction that what he's reporting is exactly as he recalls and as he believes it to be. And that clearly was the case with Bob Lazar. Now, could his perception have been a bit askew? Yes, that's possible, but he clearly wasn't lying.
I think Bob is even open to the possibility that perhaps he had been used in some sort of misinformation or disinformation campaign. I mean, look at him. He has a pirate flag floating on his house. He races jet cars. He likes fast women. He likes guns. He's technically capable, so in that sense, he may be perfect for this kind of a program. Technically capable, scientifically knowledgeable, and yet completely discreditable at a moment's notice. If you wanted to test public reaction to a story about Area 51 and then suddenly discredit it afterwards, Bob may have been the most qualified person in the country.
Lazar says that on one occasion he was escorted into the flying disc that he saw in the hangar to analyze its propulsion system.
It was obviously made to be piloted by something smaller than the average human being. Very cramped in there.
What were the size of these seats that were in there?
The seats were very small. I'd say about 1/3 to 1/4 the size of a normal human seat. A lot of people say, boy, it must have been exciting to go in there, and I always say it wasn't. It was a very ominous feeling. I know it sounds silly, but it's so unearthly in there.
You have spoken to someone who's actually seen a UFO under a tarpaulin at Area 51.
I have. I've spoken to several people who've seen UFOs or disc-shaped craft out there. There was a There was a woman who was a secretary for a major defense contractor at the Nevada test site who'd worked on nuclear programs, who told me that she had sat in on conversations between military and civilian contractors at which the Roswell case had been discussed, at which it had been discussed taking some Roswell material to Area 51. The level of secrecy during those meetings was great. Afterward, they'd take the ribbons out of the typewriters she was typing on. She was ready to tell me about this, and I had this conversation with her on the phone. The next day after this conversation takes place, she's visited by two men who say that they work for the company she used to work for, reminding her that she is still under a security oath, told her, "We know that you do a lot of traveling back and forth, a lot of long drives between Las Vegas and LA. We'd hate for something to happen to you or your family." No interview. I mean, it happened again and again and again. Same scenario.
Lazar says that in addition to being shown inside the disc, he actually saw it take off from the lake bed.
I was brought into the hangar for one of the short duration tests, and the craft was already outside on the lake bed, and that was pretty much of a marvelous sight. It's a huge thing. It's like seeing a house lift off the ground. You can't imagine the energy involved to do that. Because of the extremely high energy output and the fact that the outside of the craft is used as a conductor, that does ionize the air. And the crafts do, as a byproduct of this, glow at night, and much like a fluorescent tube will light up. So, you know, bright, strange, jumping lights in the sky, that does explain that.
Would you categorically say there is no way that humans could have built the craft that you saw?
Absolutely. I will categorically deny that. Well, I don't know. How exactly should I put that? I guess I can just say it straight out. There is no way that any government on this earth could produce that craft, period. And I defy anyone to argue that point.
One of the big questions that's hung over this whole story is whether Lazar saw a man-made flying disc and not an alien spacecraft.
A lot of these craft which are being developed in secrecy in the United States are tested at night, and one can imagine that seen through kind of half-closed eyes, something like an F-117 stealth fighter or a B-2 bomber, side-on or front-on, would look remarkably like, say, a flying saucer or a UFO.
You see an F-117, or you see Tacit Blue, or you see a B-2. Particularly if you see it from some fairly unusual angle, you're going to have a very hard time relating that to conventional aircraft. Some of these things can look very strange indeed. So, you know, an unusual but decidedly terrestrial aircraft can certainly present the appearance of a disk from many angles.
I think for anyone who's been out into the Western United States and seen the kind of place it is, and technologies which are highly exotic, highly revolutionary, and would change the way we feel about science today. However, to say that that is alien science derived from beyond this world, I think is something which is just, it is unbelievable. It's too much to absorb.
Do you think that some of the truth certainly lies out there in the middle of the Nevada desert at Groom Lake?
I would expect that some of the truth may very well lie out in the desert near Groom Lake. It's the right place for some of it to be. It's isolated, it's under control, it's high security. I don't think we've yet scratched the surface on what's happening out there with regard to flying saucers.
According to Lazar, the craft that they were secretly testing out in the desert at night used an exotic anti-gravity propulsion system.
The reactor itself was an incredibly advanced system. This was an antimatter reactor. This is something we could only dream of having, something that could put out huge amounts of power that rivals several nuclear power plants running at capacity. What happens is a great gravity distortion is created, and you're essentially bending space toward the craft. The craft becomes part of that space, and then when the reactors, or when the gravity amplifiers are shut down, the craft is essentially where it was focused. It's a very difficult thing to grasp. It happens virtually instantaneously because of the fact that gravity distorts time. And if you're bending space and time along with it, when you wind back up in that place, you're there between the ticks of a clock.
Looking at nighttime video films out in the test site area, we've seen video of craft that were luminous, that would move across the sky as if it was skipping a stone across water, or sort of a sewing machine effect. What we see across the screen are a series of lights, of dashes of light, as the object moves from point A to point B. Therefore, we are seeing what you might call a shadow effect of the propulsion mechanism at work.
Bob Lazar is not the only person who's come forward and claimed to have worked out at the base on flying discs. Former US Marines test pilot Bill Uhouse worked out at Groom Lake and other top-secret locations for more than 40 years, working for the Pentagon and civilian contractors on a variety of highly classified projects, including, he says, a flying disc recovered from a crash in Kingman, Arizona in May 1953. He said that he'd been cleared to do this interview and to discuss certain information, but asked us not to show his face.
What were you actually working on out there?
One of the things I worked on was a flying disc simulator. It was designed in New Mexico by a separate staff that built it in parallel with the actual craft that they had intended to fly. The purpose of the simulator was to train pilots to fly this strange-looking craft. The simulator was a 10-meter round disc. The skin was made of boron composite material, not unlike that you see on the F-117.
How did you know how to build the simulator?
There weren't any plans. The plans were generated as we constructed it. And there was a process there that took quite a while for us to even understand the concept way back in the 50s.
Uhaus says that Lazar did work at Area 51.
I think Bob is saying exactly what he knows, and I know a little bit about Bob from a different standpoint than a lot of the people know and what's been written about him, but Bob Lazar is not lying as far as his place and position and the activity he was involved with at the time, although some of it, you know, he couldn't recall, but there's a lot of reasons why Bob was hired, number one. You know, here's the thing. Take a guy like Bob, send him out there, you know, somebody said, you know, aliens, blah, 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 blah. You know, all of a sudden you're thinking about 9 alien crafts. You know, they may have not been 9 alien crafts.
Bravo 1714, contact departure, good day.
Do you believe that the government has recovered alien spacecraft?
I have no doubts whatsoever that the United States has actually recovered a number of extraterrestrial vehicles.
And what do they do with them?
I think that since 1947, there have been efforts to try and duplicate the technology, what is referred to as reverse engineering. And I don't know how far they've got, but some reports indicate that we've actually been test flying within a limited area actual alien vehicles or terrestrial vehicles, United States vehicles, which have been made using alien technology.
Could these not just be military aircraft?
Well, I think it's quite possible some of them are military aircraft. I've heard from very reliable sources, including a leading specialist on unmanned aerial vehicles, that we have developed some disc-shaped platforms for aerial reconnaissance, some quite small, maybe some larger, which are being utilized by the Americans and have been built by the Americans.
That's 638, 9er Delta, Las Vegas Tower, runway 10 left taxi into position and hold traffic crossing downfield. Thank you, sir, 89er Delta.
Was it a hard secret to keep?
It was a virtually impossible secret to keep. But I did play by the rules, and it caused a lot of problems. It caused problems in my family life. I mean, imagine being married at the time, and you know, you get a call, you know, perhaps at night, and a strange voice on the phone. Okay, you disappear, you can't tell your wife who it was on the phone, where you're going, and you come back, you know, sometime early in the morning. I mean, what is she going to think?
Unaware of where he was going every day and being absent from home for long periods, Bob's relationship with his wife had deteriorated badly. This was seen as a potential security risk out at the base.
My wife was having an affair with someone else, so they viewed that as a potential emotional instability, and they no longer wanted me coming out until things were cleared up, either for it, you know, it to break up or heal or whatever. But they, that's what put the brakes on everything there.
And did they then stop calling you? Did you get very frustrated about that?
Yeah, then I began to wonder, boy, now they've given me all this information and everything's come to a dead stop. What's going on? And that's when I began to be concerned, and then that's when I said, you know, now it's becoming important that some other people know what was going on.
As the silence turned from days to weeks, He finally decided to tell his wife and closest friends just what he'd been doing.
Were you aware of the security implications?
I was quite aware of what could happen, but I was also aware that these guys would go to any extent to keep their secret, and certainly not have someone that was on the inside running around. And I didn't think it was beyond them at all to make me disappear. Whether, I mean, who knows? I know it sounds more like a movie, but I didn't think it was beyond their capability to kill me, just to stop the word from getting out.
Bob knew the test flight schedule for the discs and took his wife, his best friend Gene Huff, and another friend, John Lear, out to the desert near the base on a Wednesday night in March 1989.
Huh, it started coming in too.
How far away can that thing pick up stuff if it's like overhead, like up in the air?
Overhead, 300 miles.
Jeez. So it could be any one of these guys.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that sounds military to me. Yeah, I bet you that's what this is. We got. Oh.
You see that?
Whoa. Yeah. What was that? Did you see that light just come on over there? I was looking right at it.
Yeah.
Here, let me check it out.
Well, that was a shooting star. Right above it was a meteor too. No, there's a steady light.
No, it's a steady light that just came
without
on.
Any kind of.
No, this one right over the range here. It wasn't there, and then I was looking right there, and it blinked on.
It's very bright. That's brighter than a star.
Yeah. Huh? Doesn't look like landing lights.
We got the light clear now, sir. We figured out what the problem is, and whatever that heading is, we're ready for it.
Huh. Interesting.
Okay, just change course.
White light?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's coming at us.
What did you see when you were out there?
Shortly after the flight time that I had recorded, white light came up. Well, not a white light, it was actually more of an amber light. Came up off the ground and hovered, and then began doing radical step maneuvers and darting from one side of the sky to the other, doing some impossible flight characteristics.
Do you think what you saw over the desert that night was an alien spacecraft?
Could I identify it as an ET craft without Bob's help? No, it would have been like I said, an elliptically shaped saucer doing, just doing moves that we're not capable of, but I could not say that, no, this wasn't some advanced Earth technology.
We got the light clear now, sir. We figured out what the problem is, and whatever that heading is, we're ready for it.
That would be a UFO. It's not blinking, it's not conforming to any sort of FAA lighting regulations, and there you're looking at it. That's like a typical UFO. If it was red, it would be real typical, because that's what most people report, is red lights like that are solid colored. I don't think that's landing lights, because it's curved already and we're still looking at it. Looks like he's curving back. Here he comes. That is a typical military UFO. There you go.
This small group went back to see 2 more Wednesday night flight tests, but on the 3rd trip they were spotted, caught and arrested. Bob was taken to Indian Springs Air Force Base and interrogated.
That interrogation was about as intense as you can possibly get, right stopping short of shooting me in the head.
What were they saying to you?
Everything up to and including that, we can absolutely kill you right now and there'd be no one looking for you at all. And I mean, everything. They threatened my wife. They threatened to kill my wife. They said they'd stop at nothing. They said they thought they made that very clear. They couldn't believe that I had taken anyone out there to show them that, much less left with information like the flight test data, and wanted to know what else I had said, who else I had told specifically. They were crazy. They really were. They were completely out of control.
After this interrogation at Indian Springs Air Force Base, Bob says that he was put under constant surveillance by security personnel. His phones were tapped, his movements were monitored, and he often found his car followed by military helicopters. Worried about what might happen to him and angry about how he was being treated, he decided to hit back and approached a local TV station about an interview.
I thought if I did an interview in silhouette, it would be kind of pushing back a bit, or say, you guys stop, and not saying too much, but just saying enough just to let them know that I'm pushing back a bit and then lay off, or, you know, it's going to get worse. It was really the only thing I could do.
Did you get any calls from the military or from former workers to say, what the hell are you doing?
Right after the interview aired, Dennis Mariani, who was my supervisor, called, and all he said was, do you have any idea what we're going to do to you now? And that was the end of the phone call. That was the last, well, really second to last communication I had with him. And, you know, then I decided, well, you know, that's it. And really just said everything that I had seen and done, and just wanted to divorce the entire situation.
Even now, more than 20 years later, the jury is still out on Bob Lazar and his claims about his work out at Groom Lake. It's a fascinating story which he's stuck to for more than 2 decades. And although many dismiss it as pure fantasy, the fact is that some of his credentials did check out. In addition, his former employers and even the tax authorities were caught covering up and refusing to release information on him. Why would they do that unless there was something to hide? One thing is for certain, if he is telling the truth, then we're all in for some shocking revelations in the decades to come.
Is the government ever going to say, you know, we've been lying to you for 40 or 50 years? Not a chance. I believe they'd stage an event that is much more like what they do. They'll take a big cargo plane or C-130 or something, take one of the old discs that they've you know, analyzed time and time again, and finished with, go up to a high altitude and push it out the back, and then go fly away and say, oh look, the first disc has crashed, you know, here's a flying saucer. I mean, I can almost guarantee that's the route they'd take.
There's nothing on their radars on the other.
Certainly there are a lot of questions about Bob's background that have not been satisfactorily answered. But there's too much that Bob knows, I think, that couldn't be explained any other way. He knows about the layout of the base. He knew about people who were involved in security checks. He knew when and where the test flights were going to take place, because he took people out there 3 weeks in a row and they videotaped the tests. How did he know this stuff if he, in fact, did not have some kind of inside knowledge?
Do you think he'd make a good conduit of information? I mean, essentially a patsy.
Yes, I do. I think it's quite likely that Lazar was set up, perhaps to knowing that he would give out this information.
It's likely to be a very long time before we discover what is actually being done out at Groom Lake now. They seem to wait anything from 15 to 20 years or more after something has been retired before they acknowledge its existence.
This airplane was built, designed almost 40 years ago. 40 years before that, the hottest thing flying was a Seversky P-35. 40 years before that, it was a balloon. So the technology has not stood still. So there's a very good possibility that we are looking at man-made transportation for the 21st century.
It's been so hopelessly polluted that I'm not sure we will ever get to the bottom of this story, and that's sad. I suspect that whatever was out there, discs, alien or not, have now been moved to some other location, and we may never find them again.
There might have been reason 40 years ago to believe that people couldn't handle the idea of alien visitation. I don't think that's true anymore. I think we're far more sophisticated now.
Do you regret having screwed up at S4 and taking your friends there and blowing your security cover because you could still be working on UFOs today?
Yes and no. Yes, at times I'd like to be able to go back in time and played along with the game and not have done anything, and perhaps to this day still be working on them, because I did feel privileged and it was fascinating work once you can get around all the oppressive military security. And maybe we would have stumbled on something, and yeah, it would have been fascinating.
The craft lifted off the ground, virtually noiseless, other than a small corona discharge on the bottom of the craft, indicating the presence of high voltage. That dissipated at about 30 feet, and it stood there completely silently, and moved over to the left, to the right, and sat back down. That was the entire test. However, that was an extremely impressive test. Maybe to someone that really knows little about science or anything, that wouldn't be a whole lot, but you have to realize this craft was about 52 feet in diameter. I don't know exactly how much it weighed, but it weighed a lot. And this was quite a scientific feat, to lift something completely silently, under control, and perform a maneuver like that. The craft itself was, I assume it was metal. It was cold to the touch, that's why I say it was metal, but it was a brushed aluminum, actually just an unfinished stainless steel, not shiny finish to it. Had no seams. It was as if it was injection molded from one giant die. I was completely amazed. I can't really reflect on how it made me feel, but that was exciting.
How would you define gravity? Could you describe in layman's terms its basic principles for us?
Gravity is something difficult to explain because it's something that we essentially don't understand. It's just something that we can observe. Not much is really known about gravity. There are many theories about it, but they are just mainly theories. There's theories of gravitons, which allege that these subatomic particles that act like an attractive force like gravity, that exchange between two pieces of matter. There's also a theory that gravity is a form of wave, an electromagnetic wave. But basically, gravity is a force. It's the attraction. It's the inherent property of matter to have gravity, a mutual attraction for each other, and it's basically all that we really know. Modern science, current science, right now, identifies one gravity. It's one force in nature. Apparently, through research at S4 or information gained from one of the crafts they were researching there, it appears that there are two different forms of gravity. One form works on an atomic scale, on subatomic particles, holding pieces of matter, holding atoms themselves together. Another works on a larger scale, the scale we're most familiar with, holding planets in orbit, holding ourselves to the ground, things of that sort. Because it produces a gravitational field, I wouldn't say the craft is invisible during the day. However, if you're under the craft, because of the way the gravity is being used, gravity bends time and space, and it bends light. If you are looking underneath the craft or from certain vantage points, you will actually see what's above the craft. It's really a trick of the way light bends under the influence of gravity. For instance, we can see stars that are behind the sun, that are blocked from our view by the sun. The reason we can see them is because the sun is a tremendous gravitational field and it's bending the light around it where we can see the star. Space-time and gravity are all essentially interrelated. They all act on one another. Gravity bends space. Gravity also distorts time. When you vary one, you essentially vary the other two. If you, as an example, if you have a massive body, say a planet or something that's making a lot of gravity, producing a lot of gravitational waves, if you will, it distorts space. It bends space to it. It also slows down time. These things aren't theories. We know them to be true. We cannot artificially create this because we can't create gravity. But this is how they're all interrelated.
With traveling at the speed of light,
there are several problems traveling at the speed of light. Just a couple of them are the fact that as your speed increases, so does your mass proportionally. In other words, the more energy you put in to go faster begins to slow you down by the fact that it's converted into mass. You have other problems like just traveling at such an extreme velocity, navigational problems, the fact that you might run into little tiny micrometeorites at speeds like this. They would undoubtedly destroy your craft. There's just a whole host of problems that you're going to run into just attempting to do something like that. Aside from the fact the amount of energy required to accelerate to the speed of light is horrendous.
could you briefly describe Project Looking Glass and Project Sidekick for us?
Project Sidekick was another project going on with Galileo. Galileo was the project that I was involved in. Sidekick dealt with any of the weapon potential of the craft, whether or not the craft had a weapon in it or could it be used as a weapon, but it had something to do with some sort of particle beam configuration where the gravity generator can be used as a lens to focus a weapon of some sort, similar to the SDI device we were working on in the 80s, but with the potential of a focusing device using the gravity generator.
And Project Looking Glass?
Project Looking Glass dealt with the distortion, the fact that there's a time distortion. Essentially, looking back in time, and by that I do not mean looking back years ago to see the wagon train days. They're looking for distortions that are milliseconds in time, and what that was used for, I don't know. But that was just observing the time, the time distortion, time dilation phenomena of the craft in operation.
What is element 115? Is it found here on Earth, or is it strictly an extraterrestrial material?
115 is strictly an extraterrestrial material. It probably occurs naturally in some other places, maybe other star systems. You know, some people not familiar with science or chemistry say, well, that's ridiculous. All the elements occur on Earth, you know. But that's not true. There are elements on the periodic chart that aren't found on Earth. I believe the Heavy Ion Research Lab in Darmstadt, Germany, has reached element 112 recently. So 115 isn't that far away. And when they synthesize it, it's not like they're making a couple ounces of it. They're talking about 1 or 2 atoms of it. To make any usable quantity of a heavy element like that is virtually impossible. Element 115 is in the top of the reactor. And the base of the reactor apparently is a small, something similar to a cyclotron. It's a particle accelerator. A particle is accelerated to high speed and then deflected up a small tube, and it's aimed at the 115. This transmutes the 115, similar to the way we do that in a normal particle accelerator. This causes a reaction, a radiation emission that we really haven't seen before. It produces antimatter. This antimatter is guided down a tuned tube and reacts with a gas. When matter and antimatter react, they convert to 100% energy. This energy is converted heat energy is converted to electrical power in the reactor itself. This is done through a thermoelectric converter. And this electrical power is used to power other subsystems on the craft, though there is no wiring, as we would know it. Also, that's almost a byproduct of the reactor. The reactor also sets up a gravitational wave from the 115 being bombarded. This gravitational wave was present at the top of the reactor and is essentially guided in the same way microwaves are guided, through tuned tubes. And this goes to their amplifying cavities and through the projectors that are in the bottom of the craft.
With the gravity generators running, is there thermal radiation danger to the crew?
There is no thermal radiation while the reactor is running. The thermionic generator is 100% efficient, which is in violation of the first law of thermodynamics. But in fact, it works. Element 115 is stable. And for those familiar with chemistry, we know that elements with higher atomic numbers have shorter and shorter half-lives. However, when you reach a certain point, they call it the island of stability. There is a place, and we've theorized this for a long time. Somewhere around 114 to 116, there should be an area in there where the nucleus of the atom is geometrically stable with protons and neutrons, where it no longer decays. It's not radioactive. 115 is, in fact, this element. In fact, it does occur again somewhere around element 247. Of course, we're nowhere near synthesizing that. We can only, predict things like that. But that's where 115 is.
Did the aliens, give us element 115 in large quantities?
Whether or not it was given to us, I can't answer that question. However, I was told that we have 500 pounds by one of my co-workers. How it was obtained and where exactly it came from, I don't know. Whether it came in one of the crafts or it was separate cargo somewhere, anyone can speculate. But I was told that was the figure.
You were able to get away with a sample of element 115. How much did you get away with?
No comment.
Several nighttime test flights, unofficially, while off the base. What did you see?
The test flights I saw off the base, actually the best test flight was witnessed by my friends who I had brought out there. At the exact moment the craft was hopping around and doing some really impressive maneuvers, I had turned around and I think was looking for the video camera or something to that effect. But I missed some of the most impressive maneuvers. But the craft was similar to what was done before that I had seen close up, other than the fact that it went above the mountain range, moved a much greater distance at a much higher rate of speed.
How were you able to find out about the test flight schedules?
The test flight schedules were told to me specifically because I was probably going to have to be present during those times. And at that time, the test flights were taking place on Wednesday nights. And from what they said, that was because that was statistically the least amount of traffic in the area. And that's all that they were concerned about.
Does the propulsion system release any sort of discharge or exhaust?
There was a high voltage discharge on the bottom of the craft, but as far as there being an exhaust, there was none.
Why do they appear as glowing balls of light in the night sky?
Well, that's kind of the same reason why a neon light or a fluorescent light lights up. What you're dealing with is a high energy source in essentially a gas atmosphere, oxygen, nitrogen. And when you apply enough energy to a gas molecule, they emit photons, they emit light. And I don't think it's anything, it's really a byproduct of how the craft operates. When it's emitting that much energy, the gas surrounding the craft emits light. The same reason why lightning is visible. You have a huge electrical discharge, and the gas emits light in the form of lightning bolt. If you were going to see one of these crafts at night operating, it would appear really as a glowing ball or just a bright light in the sky from a distance. Even close up, you'd see a glowing halo around it. This is typically what you'd see in your normal UFO sighting. if you've heard them a lot. However, keep in mind that lights in the sky are caused by much more common things than flying saucers.
Tell us a little more about the aurora you witnessed taking off out of Area 51.
It was a large craft, and the one glimpse I got of it was from the rear, and it had two huge square exhausts with vanes in them. And it was just, it sounded more like a rocket than a jet. I don't know. I even think he did mention that it was liquid methane powered, but there again, you know, working on the disk technology, I really could care less what was rolling around at Area 51, but it did catch my eye.
As a result of going public, have there been any attempts made on your life?
One day when I was getting on Interstate 15, driving down Charleston Boulevard, a car came up alongside of me, and I thought he was just trying to race me to get on the freeway. This was after I had left the project. It was a white, boxy-looking car. Exactly what make and model, I don't know. But I accelerated to get on the freeway to go fast, and there was a gunshot, and the back of the car was hit, and I skidded off into the median. And I stopped, and I was frightened, and I just stood there because I thought the guy was going to be alongside of me and just shoot me. I had nothing to do. I was essentially paralyzed with fear, and I waited there, and then nothing else happened. And do I know it was a government agent trying to kill me? No. Could it have been a drive-by shooting? Maybe. You know, so it wasn't. I mean, it was an attempt on my life, but by who specifically, I don't know. Though I was threatened before I had left. That they threatened my wife's life and my life, so I can only put two and two together and say that they were kind of pissed at me.
In an earlier interview, you had mentioned that they had put a gun to your head. Tell us about that.
That was after we were caught out when I had the test flight schedule, and I brought some friends out to show them the disc test. We got caught out there, and the following day I was debriefed down at Indian Springs Air Force Base. And I was in the room with the security guards that caught us, my supervisor and some other people, and some other security personnel. Yeah, they were essentially grilling me about security and, you know, how could I possibly bring people out there, and I guess I wasn't as responsive as they would like, and they got in my face, and one of them pulled a sidearm out, you know, just pushed it against me.
Have you maintained any contacts with your colleagues out at S4?
No, I never heard from anyone other than for a very brief time after I left. Dennis, who was my supervisor, did try and make contact with me at the meeting place was the Union Plaza Hotel, and I took a friend of mine, Gene Huff, down there, and another friend, a former colleague and scientist from Los Alamos, and we saw him, but I also did recognize some security personnel walking around there from S4, so whether or not it was a setup or what was going on or he was trying to talk to me, we never found out, and we left. It just was a real strange situation. I never heard from him since.
As we enter the 21st century, how has your experience changed your beliefs?
Well, if you want to word the question, how are my opinions changed? I would say considerably. And before I was at S4, I was more or less one of the guys that thought, you know, all these government conspiracy and UFO buffs and things like that were complete lunatics. I even remember before I was involved there, a friend showed me a little newspaper clipping. It said John Lear was giving a lecture who was touting that aliens from another world came to Earth and there's 70 different species. And I remember laughing on the phone that this guy had lost his mind. And I was also under the impression that, you know, boy, the government's all for the people, and they, you know, they're out here to protect us and all that. You know, after the experiences I had there, everything is completely turned around. You know, the government is doing everything but looking out for us. I mean, the only thing they're looking out is for themselves. You know, obviously the ET craft do exist. Something had to build them, so there must be aliens. And since there are, and the craft are there must be some sort of factory and an entire civilization somewhere. And if in fact that is true, and it apparently is, then there must be others. Actual crafts and technology from another world. And that's probably the most important event in history. It kind of moved from science fiction into reality in my mind. And it really just, I guess, opened my eyes. Let's go! Whether or not we can duplicate them. If we can understand what a device is or how something operates or what its physical makeup is, that's great. But if we can't duplicate it, it's useless to us. So there's really two phases to the project going on there. It's understanding what we're looking at, and then once we understand it, is can we duplicate it with earthly materials and earthly technology? And you know, unless we've got a handle on both of them, all that technology is useless to us. And if it turns out we can't do that, all we have is one single prized possession that we have to take care of, and that's it.
After all that's been said and done, would you do this over again? What would you do differently?
I would probably have played along for a longer time. I would like to have known a little bit more about the technology, and probably kept quiet if I could have. And possibly never have said anything. I almost wish I had done that. You know, it's it's really only caused headaches and problems. But I believe if I was given the opportunity again to go back in time and redo it, I think I pretty much would have just shut up and gone along with the program. I would have much preferred that instead of the Navy or whoever it was, that hand-picked a few renegade scientists here and there, that they turn it over to some more qualified people. Obviously, I was not the most qualified person on propulsion or field propulsion or anything of that sort. I was just some guy. I mean, they could have picked, I could have named 10 or 12 other guys that were more qualified than me. But, you know, if they turned it over to the scientific community and not just a couple guys here in the United States, I mean, you need a large group of people in a large lab to research what's going on there, not a little quiet installation. It's the security itself that prevents them from getting anywhere. I mean, they never do work hand in hand. You can't have a military mind. Science itself must communicate. You have to have a free exchange of ideas. That's how things progress. And when you clamp down on a security system like that, where you work in isolated groups and ideas cannot be exchanged, you don't get anywhere, and that's the problem they have.
What does the future hold for Bob Lazar?
Well, I'm not really involved in any of that stuff anymore. That's kind of put behind me. I have my own businesses that I work at, some computer graphics, some consultation, other technical jobs, radiation detectors, and a few other things like that. So really, I just go about my life, and that's, you know, something that happened that was fantastic, and it's over, but it's kind of hard to shake it loose. But eventually I will, and that'll be that. I think all the surveillance and everything stopped. I don't think anyone's bothering to monitor me. I've said everything that I know. It's been all over the place, so it's kind of a done deal. As far as whether or not there are any craft out there, I believe, you know, they were out and gone in probably the late '89, early '90, and the only thing people see now out there are, you know, either flares or planes coming into land, but that's about it.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile, found sometime last week, has been inspected at Roswell, New Mexico, and sent to Wright Field, Ohio, for further inspection.
Why in the world someone would invest such an amount of money, of effort, of mise-en-scène to put together a 23-minute film of this kind? It defies reason. It doesn't make sense.
I cannot relate these structures to abdominal contents. The liver, if it were the liver, should be over here to the right. I'm seeing a mass that I cannot readily explain, and I have great difficulty in correlating this with any human body that I have seen. As difficult as it is for me to say it, as reluctant as I am to say it, that what I have seen here does not appear to be a human being. What is this? I would prefer to say, for the time being, that it is humanoid. I'm not going to say it is from a distant planet. What planet? I don't know. But I cannot say that it is a member of the human race as you and I know the human race. I have never performed an autopsy on any body that even closely resembles the being that we see on this film. There are 6 fingers on each hand, and there are also 6 toes on each foot. They're either pathologists or they're surgeons who have done a fair number of autopsies. This supposedly was filmed in 1947, and while things haven't changed, we see some things that would have been expected at that time, such as the use of a handsaw in removing the skull cap. I should also like to point out that this kind of a rectangular-shaped, somewhat sunken tray was the kind that I recall being around many, many years ago. We don't see these things around very much today, if at all.
Aluminum in appearance. There were fragments of aircraft skin or whatever the thing was, and also some girders with pictures of hieroglyphic-like things on it. I took them to be owls, but who knows?
An owl statue. While said to merely personify wisdom, the symbol of the owl has often been described as a prominent symbol of the aforementioned Illuminati.
What does it mean? Sorry, I'm all touching you.
It means a lot of different things, but I mean, it's what's important to me. I don't think it's not really for other people to really know about. It's not really for other people to really know about.
Ye fools and priests! I spit upon your fire!
Stars don't move. Planets or anything that's like a planet does. So this is color-coded. This is what they saw on different nights. They're looking for one thing moving. They color-coded it to show that all these stars are staying still. This thing is moving. Our solar system is still terra incognita. It's full of surprises. This object is something that astronomers said shouldn't even be there. There's a whole other solar system beyond the planets that we know that are full of these things that are sort of planets, sort of comets. Some of them they call dwarf planets. That's what they're calling this one. What we're seeing is, we're seeing our neighborhood. We're seeing what's around us. And then the second part, we're seeing where we came from. We're seeing where we came from.
This doesn't add up. Yeah. We need to ask some other folks to take a look at this for us and tell us if we're crazy.
Ancient core of a gas giant that was ejected out to the farthest reaches of the solar system thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago. What does this tell us about our solar system?
Well, one thing it tells us is that we don't really understand it as well as we thought we did.
30 seconds forward. We copy you down.